Good afternoon. I'm Jason Marshall. I'm the Chief Deputy Director at the California Department of Conservation. We'll be starting shortly. I think some of the attendees may not have known that we have to sign into this building, get through the security area, so we're going to give them a few minutes to get here. While we prepare for that, this webinar is being, or the seminar is being presented over the internet as well as a webinar, and we will be taking comments from folks, questions from folks in between the various presentations today as well as at the end. And for those of you who are online watching, there is an email that you can send questions in. It is July2seminar, no punctuation in between it, July2seminar@conservation.ca.gov. We'll say that a couple of times over the course of this session, and we'll get started here in just a few minutes.
right, I believe I'm live now. I was not alive before I got here. This is Mark Nekedem. I'm the Director of the Department of Conservation, and it is the department within which the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources resides. We've got quite a contingent here from the division, and I'd like to just invite all of you to sit back and relax for a 4-hour show here on hydrologic fracking. It's truly a pleasure to host this event. We have been working with Governor Ritter and others in organizing this. As all of you know, we have been holding a series of workshops around the state on fracking, preparatory to pulling together the ideas that we need, the public perceptions and opinions that we need in order to develop a more formal regulation on fracking. And I want to make a clear distinction here that this informational seminar on hydraulic fracturing is quite distinct from our public workshops on fracking. We are trying to do everything we can to promote educational materials and as much public education and engagement as we possibly can, because once we get into the regulatory process, as all of you know, we start going into a little bit of a tighter channel, and we have to be very clear about what we're doing. I am pleased to welcome here all of our guests from the Center for the New Energy Economy at Colorado State. Former Governor Bill Ritter is with us today, and he'll be leading the panel. Governor Ritter lived through at least 2 major tsunamis of fracking regulations and negotiations in Colorado, and I think many of you know that Colorado has developed fracking regs that have become very informative for, if not the template for, many other states who are in the same process of developing fracking regs. I want to thank Governor Ritter and his distinguished panel for taking the time to come out and provide us with some of the education materials that they have developed. You may be wondering why we have a panel from Colorado speaking to us, the unique and ever forward-looking California. And that is Governor Ritter, after he, I believe, was termed out. He wasn't thrown out. He did a fine job in Colorado, but he was invited to open the Center for the New Energy Economy at Fort Collins at Colorado State University. Given the experience, the network that Governor Ritter had accumulated, and their charge there has been, and he'll talk more about this, essentially assisting states and other governments in developing essentially policy and regulation to support energy development, fracking significant among them. You will hear from all of our presenters, each one of whom has been through a regulatory process. They understand very much what the public process needs to look like, and very much appreciate the challenge of taking in a diversity of public comments and needing to respond to them in order to develop regulation properly. I've already made the distinction between our workshops and this informational seminar. I would expect that by the time we get to fully promulgating regulations, we may even have other workshops or seminars like this as well. I think there's a huge demand in the public to hear from government. As some of you may know, government is not held in high esteem by many of the people who care about us. So we are very interested in figuring out ways that we can get as much information into people's hands as possible. Because if we develop regulations without credibility or legitimacy, we might as well just hang it up. Our information that we will use in developing the regulations will come from many sources. We have tapped Governor Ritter. We've tapped the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. We've tapped many sources throughout the United States. And by the time we get to a fully fledged fracking regulation, whenever that is, I think we can have some confidence that we've done our homework. So in pursuit of doing our homework, I'd like to turn it over to Jason Marshall, if you would, and then I guess he'll just turn it over to Governor Ritter. But thank you all. Thanks for coming.
Good afternoon. As Mark indicated, I'm Jason Marshall, Chief Deputy Director here at the Department of Conservation. I'm just going to cover a couple of things very briefly for the sake of participants here. First off, important things like emergency. If we do need to evacuate the building, please head back out the same door you came in across the street to Chavez Park. In the event you need to use a restroom, they are out the back doors and to the left down the hallway. If you are on the webinar, you know the answer to both of those questions about where it is that you need to evacuate to and where your bathroom is. If you have questions during the course of the sessions, please, I mentioned this earlier, please send them to, if you're on the webinar, please send them to July 2 seminar. Spell it all out, no punctuation, at conservation.ca.gov. Today's seminar will follow roughly five topic areas: geology of oil and gas, well construction, water management issues, air emission issues, and then lastly a presentation on regulatory and policy issues. With that, each of those will be approximately 30 minutes long with 10 minutes in between for questions on that subject matter. And if we do run out of time in those 10 minutes, at the end of the session, we do have approximately 40 minutes built in for Q&A, generally about the whole of the material presented. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Governor Ritter. Thank you for being here. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mark. So welcome to this afternoon's presentation, and just thank you for hosting those of us from Colorado State University. I just want to give you a little bit of background about how we came to be here, maybe to embellish a little bit on what Mark has said. I was governor of Colorado from 2007 to 2011. Actually, I wasn't termed, but I decided not to run for re-election. In my first term, done a variety of things that we felt were really important on the energy front particularly. And on this front, we reformed significantly our Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, which is Colorado's regulatory commission, and then we turned around and modernized our oil and gas rules in a pretty significant way. When we did that, we began in a pretty difficult place with the environmental community and the gas-producing community particularly. Some of this was oil, but oil and gas-producing communities were pretty divided. By the end of it, we got to a place that is partly why we're here today. We got to a place where we felt there was a level of trust between many players in the environmental community and many industry players that we were actually developing a set of rules where we could be proud of our environmental stewardship, but at the same time where we had taken into account those things that were necessary for the industry to continue to survive in Colorado as an extraction industry. Those of you know that Colorado is an extraction state. So I left the governor's office and went to Colorado State University as the director of the Center for the New Energy Economy. And as Mark said, what we're doing is working around the country with governor's offices, with legislators, with regulators, and really working on issues that promote clean energy. And we believe this is a part of that agenda, to look at regulations on oil and gas extraction throughout the country and do what we might do to help states across the country develop a set of regulations that are environmentally sound. It's important for you to know that this team that I have with me, the CSU, Colorado State University team, we are not here because we're advocates for the industry. And neither are we here because we're advocates for the environmental community. We're advocates for information. We're advocates for the science that we believe underlies the development of this resource, whether it's oil or gas. Advocates for information for communities that are going to interact with this resource in some way or the extraction of the resource. We do believe that in Colorado we have a very good set of rules. And even since leaving the governor's office, they have been tweaked and embellished a bit and became a better set of rules. We're pretty proud of those rules. But we also believe that one size doesn't fit all, and that there's a lot that needs to be taken into consideration state by state by state. And so in doing this symposium here, we're not coming here to tell you that if you just implement everything that Colorado has done, you're going to be fine. That's actually not what we're here to say. What we're here to say is we believe that oil and gas are domestic resources that will be part of our energy future in this country. We believe there are national security implications to how we extract those resources and make use of them, that there are economic security issues about how we extract those resources and make use of them, and we believe there are environmental issues to take into account as well, and that balancing all of that is really, in part, the job of the regulators who do this work. We also believe that where hydraulic fracturing is concerned, there's a variety of myths out there. And that the most important thing we can do sort of as an antidote to this shutdown that sometimes occurs in the conversation between different interest groups is to provide the information about what hydraulic fracturing really is, where it can be distinguished from drilling, but where people are talking about drilling and hydraulic fracturing is the same, and that it is our part as Colorado State University scientists, 3 scientists and myself as a political scientist, but as scientists really to look at this issue and say it's important for us to understand this resource and our energy future in America, but in the extraction process, it's extremely important that we get it right. And that for our purposes, getting it right means thinking about all the things that have to do with drilling, with extraction, with hydraulic fracturing, and asking what are those ways that we do this in a way that's environmentally sound, where we protect land, we protect air, we protect water. And so, in part, I have come today with scientists who are going to talk about these issues. I'm going to introduce them one at a time, but as Mark and Jason have said, we're going to talk about the different aspects of hydraulic fracturing and of drilling generally. We're going to lead off with Dr. Sally Sutton. She received her Bachelor of Science in Geology from the University of Michigan and a PhD in Geology from the University of Cincinnati. She worked for the University of Texas at Austin as a research scientist specializing in laboratory techniques for understanding sedimentary rocks, and then she joined the faculty for Colorado State University in 1992. Throughout her career, Dr. Sutton has specialized in the study of shales, and in particular in the study of characteristics of shales that affect how easily fluids, including natural gas and oil, move within or through shale layers. She also has considerable teaching experience focused primarily on training future geologists and on an increasing understanding of what happens to sediments, including those that may produce natural gas and oil when they are buried by natural processes in sedimentary basins. Dr. Sutton is the chairwoman of our Department of Geosciences at Colorado State University, and I'd ask you to welcome her. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think everybody here knows that California is a major producer of conventional oil. And it's in fact third in the nation. It's been a producer of conventional oil for well over a century. And today there is increased interest in some of the conventional deposits in California, but also in unconventional deposits. And I think that's part of why there's increased interest in the topic of hydraulic fracturing and its role in the production of these deposits. What's happened across the rest of the country in the last few years has been a significant increase in the development of unconventional deposits. And by unconventional deposits, in this case, what I'm really talking about are very fine-grained sedimentary rocks that we broadly characterize under the term shale. We're using that term a bit loosely, but that's the way it's being used, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes here. And in producing natural gas and oil out of shales, what's happened is the technology has improved to a point where rocks that contain gas and oil that previously could not be economically produced can now be economically produced. And it's brought up a number of questions about environmental concerns and economics of gas and oil. One thing that you need to know is that rocks naturally fracture. When we look at shales in the subsurface, there are always fractures in them. In some cases, those fractures are much closer together and much better developed than in other cases. In some cases, those fractures are essentially held tightly shut while the rock is in the subsurface, so there can't be much flow along those fractures. But in other cases, there is enough flow, permeability to oil and gas and to water that there is natural movement of gas, oil, and water through these fine-grained rocks in the subsurface. In most cases, there's not enough possibility of flow for a well that's drilled into that rock to be able to gather the gas and oil out of the surrounding rock. And that's where hydraulic fracturing comes into play. Hydraulic fracturing can open the rock up. It adds man-made fractures on top of the natural ones and props them open. So what I want to do here today is talk a little bit about the geology of gas and oil itself. Where do gas and oil come from? What are the rocks, in particular the fine-grained rocks that are now being looked at? What are their characteristics? And then a little bit that's specific to California about what I think is special about the geology of California that makes it a little bit different situation in some ways than the development that's going on in the rest of the country. So for starters, shales themselves you should think of as being solidified mud. They're very fine-grained. It means the particles that make them up are mostly too small to see with the naked eye. And these are sometimes called mud rocks. There are other kinds of closely related rocks that technically aren't shales, but for purposes of the discussion nationally about the development of unconventional resources have been included with shales. So I'm going to use the term shale here the way it's being used in those discussions. Shale plays refers to shale formations that host gas or oil. So most shales are very low in porosity and permeability. What this means is there's very little space within the rock, either for gas and oil to occupy or for it to flow through. The picture that's on the screen, that little yellow bar in the lower right corner, is 1/10 of a millimeter. Gives you an idea what the particle sizes are in shale. In some shales, there's a lot of variability. The white particles in there are silt grains. The dark streaks are organic matter, and then there's some clay particles that fill in most of the rest of the rock. So where do natural gas and oil come from? They come from buried organic matter that undergoes chemical changes in the subsurface while buried in sediments. And this shows a diagram of the organic carbon cycle. There are two loops. The left-hand loop describes what's called the short-term carbon cycle. The right-hand loop is the long-term or geological carbon cycle. The left-hand loop represents CO2 in the atmosphere at the top of the loop. Following it down to the left, you can see photosynthesis, plants taking up that CO2, converting it to other carbon-based molecules. The plants may themselves die and end up buried, or they may be consumed by animals, and the animals end up buried. Some of that organic matter from those dead organisms has the potential to be buried under sediments, and if it's buried deeply enough, transfer over to the other loop, transfer to the geological cycle. And in the geological cycle, if it's buried deeply enough, it undergoes some degree of heating, and in that heating, the molecules that made up those dead organisms breaks apart, generates new hydrocarbon molecules, oil and natural gas, if the right kinds of organic matter are present. The geological cycle takes millions of years. The short-term cycle, or the biological cycle on the left, can be as short as days. So these operate on quite different time scales, but material does move between the two cycles. And the next diagram shows you one of the ways in which material moves between those cycles. This is a sketch of an ocean system with a lot of organisms within the ocean system, including photosynthesizing phytoplankton. And that category of organism turns out to be particularly important in the generation of gas and oil. And some of those phytoplankton end up sinking to the bottom, getting buried under sediment that might be mineral grains that have washed in from adjacent land masses. And those mineral grains tend to be quite small. These are typically not as big as sand grains. The finer the particle size is, the more likely it is to have organisms, small dead organisms incorporated in it at the seafloor. Only a portion of the organic matter in the water column actually gets preserved this way. I think on this diagram it says 3%. I've seen estimates that are closer to 1%, but it's a small fraction that ends up preserved, buried in sediments. The kinds of organic matter that get buried have some effect on the kinds of hydrocarbons that are generated. Not all buried organic matter is equally capable of producing gas or producing oil. And in fact, some organic matter probably isn't going to produce much of either one. As I said a moment ago, the marine phytoplankton are especially important. And these are organisms that require light. They participate in photosynthesis. So they're generally hanging out in the top couple hundred meters of marine waters. And there are several different categories of organisms that fall into this broader category. Diatoms are a particularly important one. And diatoms are going to come up again later. Diatoms are important generally in forming oil deposits. They're especially important in the geological history of the oil deposits of California. So I'm going to focus on them a little bit more than some of the others. So this is a picture of diatoms. This is courtesy of Wikipedia. I can't take credit for it, but it gives you an idea what these organisms look like. It's the picture in the upper left. They vary between about 0.02 and about 0.2 of a millimeter in diameter, so they're quite small. And it's because of that small size that they tend to get buried with small particles of sediment, particles that are smaller than sand grains. Diatoms have been around for a long time. We know that they've been around at least since the Jurassic, 185 million years ago. It's not unlikely that they've been around much longer than that. They're a little bit unusual compared to some other forms of phytoplankton, partly because they make part of their cell walls out of silica. And this means that the rocks that form later from the solidification of the sediments tend to be rich in silica. And that affects some of the properties of the rocks, including their ability to fracture naturally, and their ability to be fractured. It's an important point, and it's especially an important point in California, because many of the fine-grained rocks that are potential unconventional plays in California are silica-rich, and it does affect their fracturing properties. Also, diatoms are made up of a kind of organic matter that is especially good at generating oil. So they really are a very vital piece of the oil systems that we see in California as well as elsewhere. Now, not all diatoms that are living in the oceans end up in oil deposits. It depends on water temperature, water chemistry, burial conditions. It depends on predators and scavengers. At the bottom of the slide, there is a krill. Krill eat diatoms, so if you've got a lot of krill, you're probably not going to bury a lot of diatoms. When organic matter gets buried, it gets transformed fairly quickly into a material called kerogen. And kerogen is a complex material made of hydrogen, carbon, hydroxyls, oxygen, sometimes various other elements attached. It does not have a single well-defined molecular structure. The picture that's up here is meant to represent a particle of kerogen. The structure of this particle is probably not going to be exactly the same as the structure of any other kerogen particle. As that kerogen is buried more deeply, meaning there's more and more sediment piling in on top of the sediment that contains this kerogen, bonds are going to break, and that kerogen is going to chemically reorganize into smaller, better defined molecules that have the potential to become gas or to become oil. So as the temperature increases with burial and that kerogen begins to change, it begins first at the uppermost levels of burial in the sediment. It may produce a bit of natural gas, and this is natural gas that is being helped along by the metabolic processes of microorganisms. I'm not going to say very much about it. I just want to throw the term out there, biogenic gas. There are places where biogenic gas is an important resource, and it forms at shallow depths. It's generally still at shallow depths when it's being extracted and utilized. The next thing that happens as burial continues is that oil production begins. And this diagram, when you look at the left-hand side of the diagram that's up here, on the very left it gives depth in thousands of meters. So this is a rough guide to how deeply in a pile of sediments this material has to be buried for gas and oil to be generated. It's only a rough guide because it's dependent on exactly how hot a particular place in the earth is in the subsurface. It's also dependent on how quickly the sediment is buried. Rapid burial generally means that things need to be buried longer or deeper before they will reach the point where they're generating oil and gas. And the green part of the curve shows you cumulative oil production that you typically see with depth of burial. The orangish part of the curve is gas production. So one of the important points on this diagram is that oil production occurs earlier than gas production. This is excluding the little bit of gas production right at the top. That oil production within the sediments by the kerogen will dominate at a shallower depth or after a shorter time span than gas production. And this also turns out to be an important point to understanding oil and gas in California. The kerogen itself comes in a variety of types, and those types depend on the kinds of organic matter that were buried in the sediment. So what this diagram shows is that kerogen is typically classified into 4 types. The type at the top, starting in the upper left, type 1 is algal. Coming down to number 2 is herbaceous, 3 is woody, 4 is coaly. And it is color-coded according to the likely production. In this diagram, it's color-coded for whether these types of kerogen are more likely to produce oil or to produce gas. And the other aspect of this diagram is that it characterizes the kerogens in terms of their chemical composition, the ratio of hydrogen to carbon. So the type 1 is relatively high in hydrogen compared to carbon. The type 4 is relatively high in oxygen compared to carbon. The oil-producing kerogens tend to be higher in the hydrogen to carbon ratio. So type 1 is a good oil-producing kerogen. Type 2 has some capacity to produce oil. Type 2 can produce some gas. Type 3 can produce some gas. Type 4 doesn't produce very much in terms of recoverable hydrocarbons. So the kind of organic matter that's been buried is of significance here. Diatoms would be classified as type 1, the kerogen that would be produced from diatoms. So a quick look at what natural gas actually is. It's dominated by the molecule methane. It's a carbon bonded to 4 hydrogens. It may contain some somewhat more complex and longer chain molecules, ethane, propane, butane, where in each case you're adding 2 more hydrogens into carbon compared to the one that's above it on the diagram. Natural gas is classified broadly into dry gas and wet gas. Dry gas is dominantly methane. Wet gas has more of the longer chain molecules in it and is called wet gas because when it's brought to the surface, some of the longer chain molecules will condense into liquid hydrocarbons. This is important for understanding the economics of gas and oil and the economics of unconventional plays. Oil is more complex chemically than natural gas is. I can't put up just a few simple illustrations of molecular structure for oil, but I can generalize. The molecules are larger, they're denser, they're more complex than those in natural gas. And oil is liquid under subsurface conditions. It's liquid at the Earth's surface. And when you hear the term condensate, what that refers to is the longer chain molecules that are produced with natural gas that may have been in a gaseous state at the temperatures and pressures present in the subsurface, but at the surface condensed to form liquids. So to form conventional deposits, natural gas and oil have to be able to move within the rocks in the subsurface. They move through a series of connected pores or holes, and the way to think of these holes is that they are simply the spaces between individual mineral grains. Mineral grains don't always all pack together so neatly that they fill all of the available space. So in sedimentary rocks in the subsurface, there's typically some degree of porosity or pore space that's naturally occurring. In addition to the pores, there may be fractures, and the fractures will also possibly permit some movement of gas and oil. So this diagram is a little bit complicated, but what I want you to see on it is that methane, and methane on here is the three red dots in the lower left. Methane is the one furthest to the right. What's on the x-axis is size, and it's a logarithmic scale. So for each category on there, we've changed by a factor of 10 in size. So methane is plotting on there in between 1 angstrom and 1 nanometer. It's a very small molecule. Water is the blue dot. You can see that it's pretty similar in size. And above it, the green dots with the lines between them are molecules that we tend to find in oil. So part of what this shows is that oil molecules are actually significantly larger than most gas molecules. And you have to keep in mind the logarithmic scale to see that it's a significant difference. The other thing that's on here that I want you to look at is the size of pore spaces in different kinds of rocks. And we've got, in the middle of the diagram, I don't have a pointer, we've got a series of shales, and there are little histogram plots on there that show you, for each of them, the measured pore sizes in different samples of these. And you can see that the pores tend to be bigger than the methane. They kind of overlap the upper end of the oil size range. Above that are other kinds of sedimentary rocks, including sandstones. And as you go up to the top of the diagram on the right, it says medium sand. That shows you that there are many orders of magnitude, many factors of 10, between the size of the pore spaces in shales and the pore spaces in sands. And I'm putting this up here partly because it's important in understanding the difference between conventional and unconventional deposits. Okay, conventional deposits. These are the largest share of the gas and oil deposits and production historically in the U.S. The share is declining. It's declining because of the recent development of unconventional deposits. Within conventional deposits, we can have oil and gas, we can have gas. The gas and oil mature from these fine-grained rocks that have the kerogen buried in them, and those rocks are known as source rocks. Once the gas and oil begin to mature, in a conventional deposit, they'll migrate into a more porous rock, something more like a sandstone from the previous diagram, that has bigger pore spaces in it, and because it has bigger pore spaces, it usually will have a greater degree of permeability. These are known as reservoir rocks. Now, once the gas and oil gets into a reservoir rock, for it to stay in the reservoir rock, and it's important that it stays in the reservoir rock, there has to be some trap that holds it in place. If it doesn't stay in the reservoir rock, there's not going to be enough of an accumulation to make it economically reasonable to try to recover it from there. There are a couple of broad categories of traps that can hold gas and oil in reservoirs. One is illustrated on the left. It's what's called a stratigraphic trap. And a stratigraphic trap is one that forms when you have a series of layers of sediment that have been deposited where there's some change in the environment that affects the lateral extent of the different layers of sediment and affects also the sizes of the mineral grains and the pore systems that form in these rocks. So the way to look at it is the black area on there, which is supposed to represent oil, is in a permeable space that the gas and oil can occupy. But it's blocked from moving because of much finer grained material over the top of it. Oil tends to be buoyant relative to the water that is also likely within the spaces in the rock, and it will tend to push up against whatever is over the top of it. And if it can't get through it, it'll sit there and accumulate. The other two diagrams on here are what are called structural traps. These form because the Earth deforms during tectonic processes. It may fold, layers may buckle up into anticlines, or you may get faulting that actually break the rock. And those processes can juxtapose finer-grained rocks around or over the top of the coarse-grained rocks that serve as a reservoir. In California, this kind of trap is quite important. The tectonic history of California is complex. There are many, many places where the rocks have been folded or faulted in a way that helps contain gas and oil in the subsurface. Just to give you a quick look of what a reservoir rock might look like down a microscope, the blue line at the bottom is about 0.5 millimeter across. The white grains in here are sand grains. This is a sandstone. The blue spaces are occupied by glue that has been dyed blue so that you can easily see that those are open space. And the dark material is oil. So this is a case. Distinguishes the Monterey from some of the other shales around the country is its silica content. It's rich in diatoms. I mentioned that diatoms make their bodies or part of their bodies out of silica, and that makes the rocks that contain those diatoms particularly brittle. So the diatoms produce oil, and they help set the rock up to fracture easily, either because of natural or man-made processes. Something else that distinguishes this from the rest of the country is the age of the rocks. The Monterey is between about 5 and 15 million years old. This is really young. In geological terms, it's almost nothing. Some of the other plays that are under production are hundreds of millions of years old. The significance of this is that the sediments that contain these diatoms in the Monterey have not been buried deeply for very long. It means that when you go back to that diagram that showed where oil and gas are produced with respect to burial, the Monterey is mostly in what's called the oil window. It hasn't yet reached the point where it's producing a lot of natural gas. There are some exceptions, I think, in corners of the state, but it's primarily producing oil, and in fact, it's actively producing oil in a lot of places. So the fact that it's young, it's an oil producer, it's still in the oil window, set it apart. The other thing that sets it apart is the complexity of the faulting and folding of the rocks here. So there are more structural traps available than there are in much of the country. And again, I'm running a bit long here. I'll skip over a diagram there. It's also thicker than many shale plays. It is as much as 3,000 feet thick, and this is important because it can change the economics of whether somebody developing an unconventional play feels it's necessary to drill horizontally. The point in drilling horizontally, if you've got a thin horizontal layer of rock that you're trying to access, is that if you only go vertically, you may intercept a relatively short, let's say it's 100 feet thick. You intercept 100 feet of rock. If you can turn the drill bit and run it for a couple of miles, you've intercepted a couple of miles of rock. In the case of the Monterey, it's thick enough in a lot of places that vertical drilling, which is cheaper to do, can intercept a lot of the rock. So vertical drilling is considerably more important in development of unconventional plays in California than horizontal, than elsewhere, although there is horizontal drilling here as well. Also, in places, the natural fractures are great enough that there's not necessarily a need for additional stimulation in order to get the gas and oil out. There are other places where hydrofracturing or some other technique really is required. So the requirements for conventional and unconventional deposits. Conventional deposits, you've got to be able to produce and bury the organic matter. It's got to be the right kind of organic matter. You've got to preserve it. It's got to undergo chemical transformation in order to form natural gas and oil. It's got to migrate into a reservoir rock where it can accumulate until we tap into it. And there have to be low permeability barriers that hold the gas and oil in place. In comparison, an unconventional deposit, you need the first three things. You don't need the migration. You don't need the low permeability cover over the top of it. But you need the technical capability to get it out of the ground. And that's where the combination of directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing have really come into play. So in closing, what I'd say is the important takeaway message here is that if we've got the technical capability to extract from these unconventional resources, there are two other questions that need answered. And one is whether it's economic to do it. What are the dollar costs? And the answer in some places is it doesn't at the moment make economic sense. In other places it does. And what are the environmental costs? Do we understand them adequately? Have we assessed the environmental risk? And how do we factor that into the economic decision? And I'll close with that.
There we go. Thank you, Dr. Sutton. We're going to do the question and answer session right now. I'm going to ask Don Drysdale, he doesn't know I'm going to ask him this, if he can grab the other microphone. And if there are questions here from the audience, we'll just hand you the microphone for Dr. Sutton. I think we can navigate back and forth if we need to for the slides. And if there are questions for folks who are on the webinar, please don't hesitate to write your emails. It's July 2 seminar@conservation.ca.gov. So with that, are there any questions? Don, there's one behind you.
Hi, the map of the 100 most productive natural gas fields. I'm not sure what the point was in showing that. I think you said that California historically has had little natural gas production, but there was no production in the Marcellus area either. So.
This is 2009, and you're correct that if I were to show proven reserves today, there would be considerably more showing up in some other places on this diagram. My real point in showing it was the history of gas and oil production in California.
Hi. Actually, there's a lot of depleted gas fields right below us and within maybe 20 miles of this location. One of the elements seems to be that there's really no clear distinction between source rock, reservoir rock, cap rock, traps. It's all kind of almost one continuum.
You're correct. That's really what characterizes the unconventional plays, that the same rock that contains the organic matter that matures to form gas and oil is the rock that is being tapped to produce gas and oil.
This is quite important because one of the elements is to try to preserve the integrity of the cap rock in the California area, because if you crack the cap rock, everything underneath will escape.
Except, I don't want to say that can't happen, but there's an important distinction. Okay. An important distinction between the conventional and the unconventional plays is that the permeability within the rocks that make up the unconventional plays is itself extremely low. So, in fact, it's its own cap rock. I'm sorry. Source rock. Yes, it's also its own source rock. The Monterey acts both as a cap and as a source. Yes.
Question: the Monterey Shale, because of California's severe geology or active seismic situation, it could be expressed at the surface or 12,000 feet below, right? And could it be hydrocarbon bearing at the surface and also at 12,000 feet below? And therefore, could you have groundwater that's actively used by domestic agriculture in that hydrocarbon, and therefore, you know, a possible conflict?
Yes, you're right about the Monterey being present at the surface and 12,000 feet below the surface in California, and this has to do with the tectonics of the state. I don't know, and I'm from Colorado. I apologize for this. I don't know enough about where water resources are being extracted from the subsurface, but what I would say is that there are naturally occurring hydrocarbon seeps at the surface coming out of the Monterey. So there is the issue, without any human interference, of hydrocarbons in the Monterey and hydrocarbons at the surface because of the Monterey.
Just one thing. It looks the definition of the shale formation is too loose. You even mentioned Niobrara. Niobrara is not a shale, it's a limestone. So this lack of definition makes the thing very, very difficult to understand and to discuss.
You're right that I have used the term shale very loosely here. Shale, properly speaking, has a particular range of mineral compositions and arrangement of those mineral grains. I've used it more broadly to include rocks that are very fine-grained, that are sedimentary in origin, and that host organic matter. And in fact, the Monterey is interesting because it's got an array of different rock types in it, some of which are properly characterized as shales, some are cherts, some are limestones. And I think that you're absolutely right that a thorough treatment, if we had more time to talk about it, it would make sense to talk in detail about the differences among those rock types.
Hello, Dr. Sutton. This is Tim Olson, California Energy Commission. Wonder if you could comment on the unconventional process. You raised the question, is it economic? And do you have any information to show what that price point is or range to that where this is economic for the unconventional?
It's an important question and it's a complicated question. He asked about the price point for unconventional development. And it depends on a number of factors. One is there any possibility of producing oil? Is it all natural gas? Is there condensate present? Because all of those change the economics. How deep do you have to drill? Do you have to drill horizontally? Do you have to hydrofracture? Do you have to hydrofracture multiple times? And I think that I have seen estimates of what it takes to break even in terms of the price of gas for different fields. My recollection is that if you look at the Haynesville Shale in Louisiana, it takes natural gas at about $8 in order to break even. And today, natural gas, I haven't seen the price today, but it's somewhere between $2.50 and $3. And the Marcellus, I think part of the Marcellus costs as much as $6 to break even. Other parts of the Marcellus, the economics are more favorable than that because there's condensate present. I can't give you any very good answer relative to California.
Whether it be conventional or unconventional deposits, do you find that formation pressures are similar, have similarities in grain size or fracture size depending on different zones?
I'm not sure I'm getting exactly where you're going, but let me try here to answer it. Formation pressures tend to vary depending on a number of factors, and one is how much organic matter is there and what stage is it at in terms of generating gas and oil. Another is how rapidly was the sediment buried. To what extent is there preserved pore space in the sediment from the initial water that might have provided pressure in the formation. Another is what's gone on tectonically. Has the rock been folded and buckled up, and has there been opportunity to release pressure that way? I don't know. Am I getting at the right? Okay.
I'm just wondering if you see a similarity, XYZ formation has 2,200 psi, and a grain size of the production sand that you're going to. Does a similarity exist in another zone that might have the same pressure and have the same grain size?
Not necessarily. In general, the higher pressures are seen in relatively fine-grained rocks, but there are fine-grained rocks that are actually considered under-pressured, below the expected pressure for their depth. So,
we're going to do one more and then move on to the next presentation. 10 minutes, but there'll be time at the end.
A couple of questions. First of all, you're talking about unconventional fracturing, and we have been fracking conventional reservoirs in California for a long time.
Yes.
So that's something that this panel is going to affect the conventional fracturing of the reservoir, as well as unconventional fracturing of the reservoir. That has been going on for a long time. The second thing is that in regard to base of fresh water or usable water, isn't it true that if you fracture shallow reservoirs, you are actually not fracturing in some cases and lifting the ground and not fracturing the reservoir itself, rather than lifting it up, and the fracturing cannot be done in too shallow of a reservoir because of the limitation of the fracturing itself?
I think you're right on both points. One is that the first being that hydraulic fracturing has been around for a very long time. It's been used since the 1940s in a lot of conventional reservoirs. It's also been used in water wells. It's an old technique. There have been millions and millions of frac jobs done worldwide. The other point, and I don't know very much about this, but I think you are right that there is a minimum depth you need to be at for hydrofracturing to be effective. That you're not going to be able to, and I think one of my colleagues here is probably going to be able to say more about that. But.
Well, thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Sutton. We thought it was really important to start with a presentation on geology. It's difficult to have a conversation about drilling or hydraulic fracturing without understanding the interplay between the science of the rocks and the science of the underground and what we now are going to talk about, which is the drilling and fracturing processes, the mechanics of that. Tom Sale is going to give two presentations today, in part because one of our colleagues had serious health issues that cropped up over the weekend. He wasn't able to make the trip, but Tom is actually qualified to do both presentations, and we're happy about that. He's going to do them separately. So he's going to do his normal presentation first and take questions, and then do a second presentation that has to do with water and with wastewater, and then take questions as it relates to that. Dr. Sale is an associate professor in civil and environmental engineering, Colorado State University. He has his bachelor degree in chemistry and geology from Miami of Ohio, an MS degree in watershed hydrology from the University of Arizona, and a PhD in agricultural engineering from Colorado State University. He's done research and consulting over the past 28 years. He is focused on innovative solutions for groundwater contamination and the development of groundwater resources. For the past 10 years, Dr. Sale has been the primary force behind the development of the Center for the Contaminant Hydrology in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Colorado State University. There's a lot of other things here. He's been a consultant with the private sector as well, but he manages a variety of very important projects that relate back to this issue of the engineering and its relationship to contaminant hydrology. So we are very proud to have him as part of our Colorado State University staff. Happy to have him here today. So, Dr. Sale.
Thank you, Bill, and it's a pleasure to be here. I do need a hand. It's an Apple. I'm going to get an Apple computer next, I think. So I'm going to talk about drilling and completion of oil and gas wells. And again, my name is Tom Sale. I do a couple things at Colorado State University. One thing, I teach a wells and pumps class, and groundwater is really important in Colorado, much as it is here. So here's a whole group of students up there, and they're all going to work on water wells or remediation or oil and gas development. So that's interesting. It's a big thing in Colorado, much like it's a big thing here. The other thing I spend my time working on is contaminant transport, cleaning up various environmental spills, and primarily hydrocarbon releases. About 30 years ago, I found myself in a refinery in Oklahoma trying to pump gasoline off the water table. So that's kind of what my life is about. Recently in Colorado, there's been a whole bunch of oil and gas wells been put in, and they're being hydraulically fractured. So up here you see that yellow circle. That's where we live in Fort Collins, and this is the Front Range of Colorado. And I put Denver on the map just as a point of reference in case you don't know where Fort Collins is. Some people don't. And then there's all those circles out there. And those are all wells that have been put into the Niobrara Formation and hydraulically fractured in the last 18 months. There's like 2,000 of them in 18 months, and it's amazing. And that's part of the story I'm going to tell you about. So we, Sally and Brian and our colleague who's not here, we taught a class on the fundamentals of natural gas, and the class just filled up with students, and most of them already had jobs before the class even started. There's really a strong demand for people with skills in this field in Colorado, and so up there we're on our field trip, and we're all huddled over to the right, and there's an oil rig in the background, and we'll talk some more about that. And then here's just a window, and that's probably 20 miles by 10 miles or so. Maybe a little bit more than that, and each one of those little bubbles is a frac job. And I think one of the most amazing things is that you go to fracfocus.org, and in Colorado at least you click on that button and it tells you everything that was put down hole in developing that well. It tells you how much water was used. It's really quite remarkable, and I think it's just it's a great advance. But anyways, it's interesting. One thing about this whole field is how quickly it's changing. So those are my introductory comments. I'm going to talk about drilling and well completions. And my only objective here at the end of this talk is that you perhaps have a good, solid understanding of drilling and well completions. So we'll go on this journey. Whenever I start my wells and pumps class, I tell people, imagine you're sitting out next to this lake out in the desert. You're all by yourself or with your family, and the lake level gets a little lower every day, and gets a little lower, and finally there's no more water left in the lake. What are you going to do? And the truth is you're going to be thirsty, and you're going to start digging a hole. And what you're going to do is you're going to start piling rocks around that hole, and you'll dig a hand-dug well. And that's some of the very first wells that people ever built for water, and it's also some of the first wells that people ever built for oil and gas. If there was a seep or something, and you could pull some of that tar up and burn it and have it as whatever, some flammable liquid or tar or whatever. So people did hand-dug wells at first, and it's kind of an interesting introduction to the whole function of a well. Over on the right-hand side, I put a picture of a cable tool rig, and I love cable tool rigs. There's a great movie, Let There Be Blood, I believe is the right title, and it's just these classic pictures of old cable tool rigs. A cable tool rig, you take a big sharp stick and you pound it on the ground. You just drop it on the ground, and eventually you put a casing in there to guide it in the hole, and after you break up the ground, you bail out all the cuttings, and then you go back and you pound on the ground some more, and it's really a heck of a way to make a well. I guess I'm old. I've actually worked on a cable tool rig once. We did about 12 feet in a day. It's amazing how slow they are. But anyways, it's a nice introduction to the basic function of a well. You have to break up that formation, right? And then you have to get the cuttings out of the way. And then somehow or other, you have to keep the hole from falling back in on you. So that's relevant. And you also, if you're putting in an oil and gas well, you have to prevent blowout. And that's kind of an interesting concept. Sally talked about biogenic and thermogenic generation of gases, and that'll actually generate high pressures in these formations. And if you go into one, it's like shaking up a bottle of soda pop or something, and open it up, it all squirts out if you don't keep enough pressure on top of it. So it's an interesting game to manage. Drilling, it's about breaking the formation, removing the cuttings, holding the hole open, preventing blowout. Cable tool comes around in the 1850s. Before the Civil War, people are doing cable tool drilling, and that's interesting. And you get about 10 feet a day. So if you're going to be on a well that goes down a couple hundred feet, you're going to be sitting there for quite a while, kind of a lifetime occupancy or something. Here's some interesting photographs that I got off the web. This is a field in Azerbaijan in the 1890s, and that one on the left, there's a blowout. And it's kind of interesting. You can see all these liquids are coming out of the well. It's because that formation's all pressurized. And if you look on the left, there's a bunch of people with shovels, and they're digging out this ditch to move the produced fluids out of the way. And actually, I like looking at this picture. There's a house in the middle, and there's some people standing outside wondering what's going on with their lives. And so oil and gas has arrived in their community, and you start to wonder. On the right-hand side, there's another picture. So this is the 1890s. Now the interesting thing is in the maybe the 1930s, I don't really know, something called mud rotary comes along. And so here's my attempt to describe mud rotary. On the left-hand side, there's a water well rig, and there's a pipe that's kind of hanging crooked in the air. And that's because they're picking up a piece of pipe and they're going to screw it on, and they're going down. That number one is a big pad. It's a bunch of bags of bentonite. And over on the right, where the number two is, there's a big pit in the ground, and they're adding the bentonite. Perfect. So they're adding. Ooh. Doesn't seem to be making it. Anyways, there's a pit, so they've got bentonite, they're mixing it in water. I tried to draw a picture over on the right. It's a little tough, but there's a conductor casing, which is labeled number 3 up there, and then there's a pipe that goes straight down, and they're spinning that pipe in the hole. On the bottom of that hole, there's a drill bit, and in this case, they're pumping that drilling mud down the drill pipe. It comes out at the bit, and then it carries the cuttings up the hole. So that's mud rotary, direct circulation. Mud rotary. Aha, perfect. Right here, direct circulation mud rotary. The cuttings come out of the surface here, the big stuff falls out, and then the liquids get recirculated back down. And that's a great deal. Mud rotary, hundreds of feet a day. Woohoo, we can drill hundreds of feet a day now. That's pretty cool. Most of the gasoline that you've ever used in your car probably came out of a hole that was drilled mud rotary, and it took people a day, at rates of hundreds of feet per day. Also, one thing that happens with that's a tricone drill bit on the type on the right-hand side. There's all kinds of drill. That drill bit wears out periodically, and then you have to trip all the way back out of the hole, put a new drill bit on. It takes a couple days to trip in and out, a couple days, but it takes time to trip in and out. So infinitely better than cable tool. And now there's something new and something really exciting. So this is my wells and pumps class in 2011. And the local water well company said, "You got to come out and see this." And I was blown away. It was really remarkable. This is mud rotary with downhole mud motor, and they can drill thousands of feet per day. When we went on this field trip, they said, well, we can drill 4,000 feet a day on a good day. And then this year we went out on a similar rig, and they said, well, we can drill 6,000 feet a day. It's like, wow. I mean, to go from cable tool to mud rotary to this directional drilling it's a revolution. It's a remarkable thing. I've got my whole class here. Here's the local guy from Ensign Drilling. I always appreciate anybody from industry who will spend time with me and my students. And that's me. And then this guy over here, he got a job with them, and he's making $100,000 a year, and he's looking at going to Nigeria to operate a similar rig there. Just a wonderful opportunity for a really bright student. So it's interesting. One thing that's happening here is that piece of drill pipe that was hanging in the air here, this drill rig, it automatically picks up the drill pipe and screws it on without anyone having to handle it. Every time I see that picture, I think, well, you could just go to lunch and tell the drill rig to trip out of the hole, and it would do it. It's all automated. There's a much smaller crew, and they work much faster. And one thing, it is much, much safer. This is pretty remarkable. This is like a little space headquarters, like NASA control or something. All kinds of cool stuff going on up here. So to get into the details of some of this, here's the drill bit, and this is a piece of titanium with diamonds on it, and it's got all these little ports in it that are about as big as your fingers. So they're pumping 500 gallons a minute through 3 holes of drilling mud through 3 holes as big as your fingers. And this drill bit probably hardly ever sees the formation. It's more about jetting and shooting the formation out, breaking it up hydraulically with jets as opposed to mechanically with wear. The cool thing about this drill bit is they can do multiple holes per bit, and they don't have to be spending their time tripping in and out to just change out a bit. So that's remarkably faster. The other thing that's really amazing is that drilling mud, it goes down the drill pipe and it gets to the bit here, and in between there it goes through a mud motor. This high pressure fluid goes through like a weather vane, and that's what turns the bit. The drill pipe on this rig, its surface was not rotating at all. It's just this downhole mud motor that's spinning the drill bit, and that's really remarkable. What really makes that remarkable, so here's the whole drill string. You're coming down, here's the drill bit. What they can do is they can deflect that last bit at 3 or 4 degrees. So what happens if you have a drill bit, and it's like this, and then you deflect the bottom? It's going to curve over. So they can drill off on horizontal. Well, they can drill through about 500-foot arc and make a well go horizontal. Just amazing. So there's a little note over here, and this is my recollection. I think they completed 23 wells on one pad. That's amazing. That you just kind of set up and do all your work in one spot. I want to remember, I changed my notes here. 23 wells, I think they were going to do that in just a little over a month. That's just amazing. Now think about those cable tool rigs. People were sitting on those things for years, maybe 3 or 4 years to get a single hole in. And here a drill rig is putting 23 holes in on one pad in some fraction, a month plus a few days. It's just remarkable. So here's a picture here that shows, a little hard to see from this distance, but there's a drill pad up here, and then there's all these vertical lines going in, a bunch of vertical wells, although portions of them deflect off so that you can cover a really large area from one pad, and there's multiple pads out here, and that's kind of interesting too. So to move on in what I consider a revolution, here are all the drill cuttings. Instead of going into a pit in the ground, they go into this whole process, this whole unit operations here. And the first thing is the cuttings go across the shaker table, and all the solids get separated out. And then ultimately the liquids go through a centrifuge, and you get more solids separated out. So all the cuttings, there's no longer mud pits. Mud pits were kind of obnoxious things. They were left around drill sites, and now we don't have mud pits either anymore, which is someone who's been responsible for cleaning up some mud pits. I think that's just great. here's the well they're drilling on right there, and here's the last one they put in. They're about 20 feet apart. So here's a completed well. Here's the mud engineer. This woman works for our local company, Hydro Resources, and she's just so enthusiastic. She's telling all these kids, as an instructor, I really enjoy this. You guys got to get out here and do this, and it's really fun. Her job is to make sure that the mud weight is, one of her jobs is to make sure that the mud weight is sufficient to keep the hole from blowing out if they do hit pressures. So all along the way, she's keeping track of how deep they are, what the weight of the mud is, all kinds of interesting things. She's out on this site every day, working with the driller, making sure that they've got the right fluids. And drilling muds are interesting. You have to have enough viscosity to carry the cuttings out, enough weight to hold the hole open, enough weight to prevent blowout. It's a lubricant. And you have to work on solids to limit fluid losses. So there's all kinds of interesting things that mud engineers do. They're very important to the overall safety and security of the system. Here's a blowout preventer. This is underneath the rig here. And if you're drilling down and all of a sudden you get into a formation that has really high pressure, you're going to get a pressure kick. And they've got all kinds of detectors down hole that keep track of the pressure in the drilling mud. And hopefully the mud engineers kept enough weight on the mud at this point that you can't get a blowout. But then, even if that were not to happen, there's about 3 ways they can shut off this surface casing here. Here's a guy. They're always doing maintenance on it. And blowouts are pretty uncommon anymore. They still happen. It's a probability thing. But overall, they're rare and infrequent. So that's a good thing. Having all those fluids blow out on the ground is nothing anybody would want to have. So to kind of summarize drilling, here's Azerbaijan in the 1890s, and this is really scary. All this water, all this brine has high total dissolved solids and hydrocarbon, and these people are standing in it. And here we are sitting out with our class, and I would eat my lunch off the dirt at this drill site. And it's just amazing how far we've come. So on the header I said then, now, and tomorrow. The amazing thing is this technology is not done evolving. And I think one of the biggest challenges of this whole field is things are moving so quickly. And it's interesting, and it's an opportunity. Things are evolving really, really quickly. 5 years from now, I'll be saying, I can't believe they're doing this, and it'll be something new. It's really, really impressive. So the second part of this talk is well completions. So you've got a hole in the ground, and you have to set casing, and then you have to put cement around that casing. That once the casing is in the ground and the annular space is filled up with cement, you need to connect the inside of the well with the formation, and that's perforation. And then you can stimulate the formation. There's lots of ways to stimulate formations, and the one that seems to have caught most people's interest these days is hydraulic fracturing. So those are the topics I'm going to take on in the next few minutes. So this is kind of a tedious little process here, but bear with me. And when I'm done with this, you'll understand setting casing and setting cement. So the first casing they put in is called a conductor casing. And I've just imagined that typically this doesn't go down very far, but we'll put this casing in the ground, and this dotted line is the edge of the hole out here, so the pipe is just kind of rattling in that hole. It's not secured in any way. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come in here, and we're going to put this plug in the bottom of that hole, of that casing. And then on top of that plug, we're going to put some cement. And above that cement, we're going to put another plug. And then above that, we're going to put a displacing fluid. So what we can do now is we can push the cement out of the annular space in the casing into the annular space, or I should say out of the space in the casing into the annular space between the formation and the casing. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to push down on this water, squeeze the cement out, and it goes up into the annular space, and now you just have to let it cure for a little while, and there's all kinds of standards for cement, for having different strengths for different applications, and there's all kinds of endless specifications on all those things. So now we have this conductor casing, and the next casing we're going to put in is commonly called a surface casing, and you do the same thing. You drill the hole, you set the casing, you fill it full of cement, you displace the cement up into the annular space, and now you have actually 2 casing strings, and this one is completed. You can't read that very well. This is supposed to be the groundwater zone up here, but now this whole pipe isolating what's inside the casing from the groundwater zone. And oftentimes there's another casing string, an intermediate casing string. And what happens here sometimes is you don't fill all the annular space between the casing and the formation with cement. And there's a variety of reasons like that. Typically this would be in a tighter formation, and we'll talk some more about that. Ultimately, you're going to go down and put in another casing, and this would be the production casing, and you'd cement that in. And again, it's not always the case that this annular space, the cement's carried all the way up to grade. You might say, well, who decides where that cement goes? And usually there's some state regulatory agency, and here in California, you have rules about doing all that, and they look pretty cool to me. I'm not going to claim to understand them all, and I would let others speak to them. But there's individual rules for different fields. Is that correct? Good. Yep. Okay. So there we are. So here's an API guide. This is exactly what I just showed you, and this comes from hydraulic fracturing operations, well constructions, and integrity guidelines. There's all kinds of guidelines out here in addition to state rules. This little splurb says here this is all about protecting groundwater. So there's purpose and intent to doing all of this. Now, that was a vertical well, and that's a pretty easy thing to explain. Now, as I mentioned, when they drill down, if they put a little kink in the neck of that string right above the mud motor, they can actually deflect the hole off horizontally. And in this case, there's a large horizontal section. These horizontal sections can be thousands of feet. I think the biggest numbers I've heard is 6,000, but maybe they get larger than that. You can see the enticing thing about this. Let's say this unit here is 30 feet thick. If you just put in a vertical well, you don't really have a very large production zone, maybe 30 feet. And if you run this thousands of feet out, all of a sudden you have a much, much bigger production zone, and particularly if you're in a fine-grained formation where fluids and gases aren't going to move that far. There's huge advantage to going down that path. So this also comes from an API guidance document, 2009, and they're showing the similar kind of completion with casing and cement here. And here's right next to it is another well that's installed vertically. So more and more you're seeing vertical completions, vertical and horizontal completions. In Colorado, most of the wells have been vertical, but all of a sudden there's more and more horizontal holes. And I think the primary reasons is the equipment is showing up in Colorado to complete horizontal wells. So that's interesting. So I don't know much about this. Here's our California government webpage, and it talks about the Department of Oil, Gas, geothermal resources, and here's a bunch of field rules. And I didn't get very far into this weekend, but here they are. Here's a specific field, and here's a whole bunch of guidelines and stuff for casing, where cement goes, and I'm pretty impressed. Really, I'm a groundwater hydrologist. I'm not an oil and gas person. I'm curious. My interest is how all this might affect groundwater. So I don't want to claim to be an expert or appear ignorant about things, but at least I'm getting a good sense now of what's going on, and hopefully you are too. Once the casing, the production casing, is cemented in, there's this problem that the casing is not in any connection with the formation. So the curious thing is people perforate the casing. They set a charge and send a projectile through the steel, through the cement, and into the formation. Pretty remarkable thing to be doing, in my mind. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. You can also do this with jetting tools and all kinds of stuff. Now here's an interesting part. Let's move on to formation stimulation via hydraulic fracturing. So this is supposed to be a fracture. There's two plates, and they're held next to each other, and the spacing between those two plates in our little drawing here is B, and this just says that the flow rate through that crack, through that aperture, is proportional to the aperture thickness cubed. So if you go in there and you double the size of that fracture, you're going to get an 8-fold increase in flow. Or What if you make it 10 times bigger? You'll get an 1,000-fold increase in flow. So you're in these really tight formations, and you get this huge benefit by pushing those two walls away from each other. And that's the core concept behind formation stimulation via hydraulic fracturing. So this comes from an API document. There's actually 3 API documents I'll mention at the end, but it talks about how fractures form and how they propagate out about wells, and they can propagate out horizontally or they can propagate out vertically, and it's interesting. It's a bit of interesting solid mechanics. It has to do with how loads are distributed in the formation. It has to do with secondary features within the rock itself. Per the discussion we were getting into earlier, in Colorado we've been hydraulically fracturing water wells, and I'll show you a picture here in a minute or two, for quite a while, and that's at 2,000 feet. So you can actually do hydraulic fracturing at 2,000 feet. In the groundwater cleanup industry, we've been injecting chemicals into impacted soils and clays at depths of a few tens of feet. So people have been propagating fractures at all kinds of different depths. But it's a bit of soil mechanics, and it's an interesting topic, and certainly beyond the scope of what we need to talk about here. This number 1 here, this line item here, this is the image of what this author of a PowerPoint I found online is thinking. Here's the pipe, here's the fracture, and then if you just pressured up that fracture, it would open, and if you just let the pressure off, it would close. It would be like blowing up a balloon and then letting the air out. You'd end up with nothing, really. So what you have to do, or what is commonly done when you fracture, is when you blow it up, you push a sand or a proppant into that space, so when you take the pressure off, it holds the fracture open. And here's all kinds of different materials that you can use as proppants, and it's quite clever and innovative. This one here has a resin coating on it, and several of us were out at a Halliburton site. They were, in fact, using this. I guess it kind of glues together, creates a filter pack. Certainly. I apologize. Can you hear me? Okay. Great. Sorry about that, and thanks for helping me out. So here's what they're injecting. This photo comes courtesy Halliburton, invited Brian and myself and our other colleague Ken Carlson, who's not here, out to a site, and this is what they're injecting. And you might think that's pouring out of the cup, but it's not. It's just kind of hanging there. Now think about it. If you really want to drive that proppant back into a fracture, you need a high viscosity solution. Something like toothpaste or even far more viscous than that. So that's what they're injecting. That's frac fluid. That is the fluid used to carry the proppant. Okay? Good. So this is another interesting, this is my picture from a water well hydraulic fracture in Colorado, and here's a date, February 2006. So there's a couple things on this. Over here is pressure, and this lower pressure is the pressure at the pump or at grade, and then this is the pressure at the bottom of the hole, and what you see is initially the pressure at the pump is 0, and they turn the pump on, and the pressure goes up, and then the pressure at the bottom of the hole, which is higher by the hydrostatic pressure of the fluid column, follows the same pattern. So we go to one more slide. Over here on the right now, this is actually the slurry flow rate. So initially they pressure it up and there's no flow. And then finally they get it up to higher enough pressure and the flow starts. And then the flow continues. So the fractures, initially you don't have enough pressure, you initiate the fracture, and then it begins to expand out, and that's how it goes. In this case, everything's done with food-grade chemicals to support it, to give you viscosity and all the other things you're trying to accomplish. This is our field trip courtesy of Halliburton. This is Wells Ranch. It's just your run-of-the-mill. I'm sorry, it's just your run-of-the-mill 20-square-mile ranch in eastern Colorado, and pretty interesting place to be doing development of an oil field. This is in the Niobrara Formation. Over here on the left, there's a single well out by itself, And here's a frac job going on. And then here they're beginning to pump out the frac fluids and get the wells, move the wells towards production. So that's what I pretty much just said here. It's interesting, why is there a single well out here? This one actually has 8 horizontal wells. This one also has 8 horizontal wells. And the truth of the matter is I don't exactly know. Perhaps they wanted to prove out the formation and see if it was productive by putting in a single vertical well, or perhaps they're just trying to exercise their lease. But anyways, you get a sense of it. So here's what a frac job looks like, and I was most impressed by this. First of all, down here there's 10 of these trucks, and they each have 1,800 horsepower diesel engines on them, and they're all collectively pumping about 1,800 gallons, 1,900 gallons a minute of that high viscosity fluid down the hole. I mean, it's impressive. If you're impressed by large mechanical things. Over here, there's sand hoppers. There's trucks that are bringing sand in here. I think they're fracking a 6,000-foot horizontal section. I don't know that exactly. They're going to do that in about 12 hours. They're going to frack that entire section in about 12 hours. So they have to feed all the things that are necessary to keep this going: fuel, sand, water. Into the hole. So this is pretty cool, and this is the horizontal section of the pipe, and in this case it's an open hole application, and I assume that's suited for certain rock types, and it has some advantages. And here's a cemented application, and what they do is they drop this ball into the pipe, and it travels down. And it opens up one section and it plugs off the rest. So that they drop as many as 20 of these balls of different sizes down the pipe, and it opens and isolates various fractions. So they can essentially do this hydraulic fracturing of that entire section without even really pausing. They back off a little bit on the pressure, and then they put their foot back on the gas pedal and move forward. So that was pretty amazing. You got to be really careful you drop the balls in the right sequence. So they were very, very attentive to which ball they were dropping. So, and then since it's the baseball season, I put this is dropping the ball. This guy's up here on top of the stand here. He opens up the top, he puts the ball in, and then he runs some fluids that chase it down the hole. And that's pretty impressive. You know, this is a very busy place, and I think nothing in my mind, or their minds, in this case Halliburton, is more important than safety. So there's myself on the left, and Brian, who will speak next, and Ken Carlson, who's not with us today, sitting there, and we're all dressed up in these suits with hard hats, and we've been lectured about safety for quite a while, and everything's being done in a very safe and thoughtful way. I had my first job out of undergraduate school in 1980 working in a refinery in Oklahoma, and it was not like this. I mean, we as a society have come so far in terms of safety, and the thought and the care that everyone's taking on these sites is really, if nothing else, quite different than it was 30 years ago. Safety, safety, safety. The additives here that go in are water, sand, gel, something to bring the viscosity up, a biocide. What you don't want to do is have a bunch of biological activity fouling the production zones, so that's why a biocide is added. You got a bunch of steel pipe down in there, and you've shot holes through some of it, so you need to worry about corrosion. Acid. Don't know. I'm not going to even guess.
2.5 times hydraulic head, maybe?
Oh, I really don't know. It gets complicated.
Okay. Well, it's important especially to the casing. And one of my concerns is you have the hydraulic fracture pressure being exerted against casings and cementing and well-bore walls, which have only been tested usually to a hydraulic pressure. And when you talk about the casing being encircled with cement Sometimes. A lot of times it's with drilling mud. Maybe heavier than normal drilling mud, but it's still drilling mud. And what would be the impacts of hydraulic fracturing, not on the formation, but on the integrity of the casing cement wallboard?
So your point is, to do this right, we have to use the right casing materials, and we need to manage the pressures that are applied, and that's an engineering problem, and it's doable. You know, you can pick.
PSI rather than 2,000 PSI, that's significant.
Well, you know, if somebody puts a piece of PVC pipe in there, it's not going to work, right? You have to build these things with the right materials. Brian, do you want to say something?
Yeah, the downhole pipe is rated for the pressures that are used. The casing.
The cement wall integrity, and that's why they have well integrity tests downhole to check as to the bonding of those three elements. If you exert 8,000 PSI, what happens? May not be as right as it could be. One driller in Southern California, he tested to over 8,000 PSI on the surface equipment because he was concerned about the safety. You lose 8,000 PSI and you've got a problem. It's also a matter that he cemented 100%. No drilling mud on the outside.
So if I may, I'm hearing a combination of a question and a concern, and what we'd like to do here today is make sure that we're focusing on the questioning about the practice. We've got workshops across the state where we're talking about concerns about what kinds of things do we need to do to make sure we've got well integrity, for instance, and we really welcome those. But we're going to run out of time if we turn this into a combination of information presentation as well as comments on a regulatory practice. So,
Dr. Sale, could you go back to the slide that showed where things could go wrong, please? And that wasn't up there for very long. And I saw hydrocarbon spills at the surface, well casing failure into groundwater were two I saw, and then I couldn't see it after that.
Yeah, there's spills at the surface from tanks.
You're not on mic.
Thank you. Next talk I'll get this figured out. So what things to be worried about? You know, you can have spills at the surface from leaks from tanks or whatever, and some people have been using ponds. We'll get into that in the next talk to store, and ponds can leak. You could worry about whether the fractures are propagating all the way upward to shallow zones, and people have measured how far fractures propagate, but it wouldn't be prudent to fracture into a very thin unit that had groundwater at a very shallow depth above it. Mm-hmm. One thing to worry about is historical old well completions in these areas, and so that's something to contemplate too.
How long can cement last down there and not become structurally unsound?
I don't know.
We have the case in West Virginia where groundwater is polluted by a failed well casing cement job. Can you go back to that slide, please? So can you say what those things are? Because we can't read it from here. Maybe on web we can.
So starting at the left, there's a water well, and I was wondering if gases could go up a former well casing and get up into the shallow groundwater. That's something to be worried about. To the right of that, there's a well, and there's a bunch of red boxes up there, and those are my frac tanks. And I was thinking about leaks from those. And to the right of that, there's an injection well, because the fluids, as we'll talk about in the next part, we're going to manage some of the produced fluids that aren't hydrocarbons. And to the right of that, further on, there's a domestic well. So these are all the things that we need to be contemplating.
And so one of your expertises is well casing the cement jobs. Is it possible for those to be fractured or made ineffective by seismic activity, either at the surface or 500 feet below the surface?
You know, one of my areas of expertise is not well casings and cements. I'm just trying to appreciate what's going on here, and the questions you asked is one to contemplate.
Okay, thank you.
Go one more, and then we're going to have to move to the next presentation.
My name is Saeed Irani. I'm a petroleum engineer. And the answer to some of those questions is that we never exceed 75% of the casing allowable pressure during the frac jobs. So we calculate everything, making sure that nothing exceeds the allowable pressure of the reservoir. We have dealt with casing and cementing for the last 50 years, 60 years in California, and we haven't had much failures, and the Division of Oil and Gas monitors the integrity of the casing and cementing in California on a regular basis. Just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're going to make sure we get wrapped up here on time. Let's go to the next presentation if we could. Governor?
So the next presentation is Tom Sale again, presenting for Ken Carlson, who was unable to be here, but on issues related to both water in the hydraulic fracturing process and water and wastewater management.
So our colleague Ken Carlson has an ulcer, and we're sorry about that. So we'll run through Ken's slides here on water use, treatment, and disposal. These are largely Ken's slides. Can you hear me? Okay. I'll. The picture here on the screen's too little, so I'm going to look up to my left here. Water is essential for energy development, and water is part of all energy, be it coal or geothermal or whatever. Energy is essential for water resource development too. So energy and water are linked. And we can talk about water intensity, how much water you need for various fuel types, and Ken has this list here. So ethanol really takes a lot of water, if you want to look at this graph, and at the very bottom, maybe biodiesel from non-irrigated soybeans has different. So if you look in the middle here, there's all kinds of different things in here about how much water it takes to produce energy. So hydrofracking and oil and gas isn't the only place that we're using water to get energy, and it's interesting to contemplate the relative merits of each. And as we work with water, it's not just about the quantity of water, but its quality, and water quantity are inextricably linked. So Ken has put together this picture here, and there's a brief introduction to hydraulic fracturing. Here it says site preparation. You have to get everything ready to do a frac job. You have to pull water in. You have to provide the hydrofracking fluid with all its additives and proppant. You're going to pump it down the well, and you're going to fracture the formation. And after you've done that, you're going to pump the water back out, and you're going to have to manage that water. This picture here from an EPA document has a little pond, and ponds are becoming less and less frequent. More and more things are going into tanks, and you're going to have to do something with these fluids to treat them, and ultimately you're going to have to dispose of them, and you get some gas here. So that's the general process of it all. The life cycle of a well, Ken put together here, and we largely talked about site preparation and equipment mobilization and well completion. There's transport, storage, and mixing of fluids. There's the hydraulic fracturing process, which I talked about, and then there's managing flow back. And so here's a site where I presume the hydraulic fracturing has occurred, and now they're starting to manage the fluids that are initially being produced out of the well. So Ken asks us here, where does the water come from? And in Colorado, that's a tricky thing. In the communities to the east of us, people are hauling water from Wyoming sometimes because people don't want to see water changed from an agricultural use to some other use. So the whole issue of where you get the water to do a frac job is a big issue. Complicated. Ken outlines what the fracture fluids are. It's mostly water. There's a little bit of it's proppant. Some of this is acid, and then there's other elements in here too. And it's all the things I talked about. And people use different recipes in different places. And again, I find relief on fracfocus.org that in Colorado all these things are widely displayed, and there's transparency as to the chemicals that are being used. So here's just fracfocus.org, and obviously you can't read that, but it has everything listed that's put down whole. So that's I think a big step forward. Here's so you have that well that's been completed, and you're going to start to produce fluids out of there. And so the first instant you start pumping back on that well, what comes out of the well is going to be the fluid you're putting down the well. And there's a period where you're getting a solution back out of the well that doesn't look terribly different from what you put down to fracture the well. And that's called flowback, frac flowback. And then at some point out here, you really stop producing the chemicals that you were putting down, and you're just producing formation water. When you're producing oil and gas, typically there's some water that's produced with it. So production of water through the life of a well is part of production. So all while we're producing water. Initially, it's the flowback water, and then over an extended long period of time, it's the formation waters. And we have to deal with that all the way. So where does the water go? A lot of the water goes into deep injection wells. And so we produce the water here. We separate out any solids. We separate out any gas. There's some kind of, in this case, it's interim flowback, and it goes to a deep disposal well, and it's trucked. And what Ken is contemplating here is the cost of transporting the material, and then the surface water disposal. So this is pretty expensive. And wouldn't it be nice, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could treat those fluids and reuse that water? And would that be more economical? So more and more people are looking at reuse of produced water. Here's a Class 2 injection well. There's a lot of them in the U.S. Total injection is on the order of 2 billion gallons of brine per day. Enhanced oil recovery, a lot of times the produced water is put back in the formation to help drive the water from the injection point to the recovery well. So you can produce more water out of the formation by water flooding with the produced water. And so this says that 80% goes to enhancing recovery, water flooding the formation, and the other 20% goes to disposal. So that's part of the game. It needs to be thought about. Where does water go? Again, and in this case it's talking about reuse. So in this case, the flowback goes to some kind of water recovery system, and all people are doing all kinds of interesting things with treating water at wellheads. If you could treat the water at the wellhead and reuse that water for the next frac job, you wouldn't have to haul that water to the site. You wouldn't have to dispose of the water. So companies like Veolia and GE Water Services and others are working hard and fast to find ways to treat water at the wellhead. It would be a very interesting and promising opportunity for all in terms of streamlining this whole process. So here's an example of a reuse system, and it starts off with a big tank, and they're blowing air, and they're dissolved air flotation to get the oil off the top. They're polishing the remaining organic contaminants out with granular activated carbon. They're precipitating out calcium, magnesium, things that create hardness, using various chemicals. They're running that through a sand filter, ultimately different processes. Finally, it goes through reverse osmosis, and you end up with a brine that would have to go to deep well disposal and some water that hopefully you can reuse. So people are doing all kinds of creative things with water reuse. It's unfortunate Ken's not here to explain them to us in detail. And Ken has this slide, how regulations relate to hydraulic fracturing, and this all comes from the Interstate Oil and Gas Commission. So there's all kinds of rules and regulations that come into play as to how we manage and treat water. I like this slide of Ken's here. Ken's calculating water intensity, and it's how much water you need to produce various amounts of energy in terms of various units, and I'm not going to go into this in any great detail. Here's Ken's calculating water intensity for various formations. Here's the Barnett, the Fayetteville, the Haynesville, the Marcellus, and the Niobrara. And here's units of gallons of water per amount of energy produced. So you can think about that. So my summary on this one is that water, energy, and environment are all linked together. When students are getting out of school now, I'm saying this is what you need to do. You need to be part of this world of managing water, energy, and the environment. These things all link together, and students, I think there's real opportunities for students and professionals that can deal with all three of those issues concurrently. The issues with formation stimulation relate to raw water and its effect on other activities in a community, dealing with the flow back and ultimately dealing with the produced water. And the evolving practices of the past, what was being done in the Marcellus 5 years ago is not happening anymore, or at least parts of it, where practices are evolving quickly. So there's what we were doing in the past, there's what we're going to do now, and I think this water treatment at wellheads, there's all kinds of very interesting opportunities there. So in the end, I'm going to repeat the soundbite I had. It's about doing energy right and getting it all figured out. I am ready for questions.
Okay. We'll open it up again for questions on water.
First, on frac focus, I think it's important to let people know here and on the web that everything is not always listed in frac focus. They use trade secrets to hide a significant proportion of the things that are injected into the well. Secondly, I wanted to ask you about deep injection wells. You said that's where brine goes, but aren't things other than just brine water, very salty water injected? What about flowback that would have frac fluids in it?
That's right. Lots of
Any
things.
idea about percentages?
Well, no, I don't know about percentages, but you're right in saying that injection wells carry more than brine. Injection wells are widely used to dispose of liquids for a variety of reasons, and it's certainly more than brine.
Other questions? Tom, we haven't checked. Have there been any coming in online and email? As a reminder to folks who are on the webinar, July 2 seminar at conservation.ca.gov. Don, there's one back here.
Hi. Yeah, I was just wondering if you could go back to the where does the water come from slide. I didn't quite catch all that.
Okay. Was there a question, or you just want to make sure you saw the slide? Okay. So you all know we will be getting the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll be posting that in the future so that folks who are watching the webinar in the future, you can actually jump to the slides as well. Another question here?
This is a general question that relates to your previous presentation as well. Are there any general or generic differences between fracturing that's done to recover natural gas versus fracturing that's done to recover oil?
You know, I suspect there might be differences, but I'm not aware of what those details are. Sally, can you?
It does change with the formation, with the tightness of the formation. They will change the composition in a particular stage. They may run a viscosity enhancer at a certain point, a slick frac at another point, and so it does change within one frac section. It changes as a function of formation. There's some areas that they'll run largely slick water, others that they'll need, when I say slick water, I'm essentially meaning just water and sand. There's other where they need more chemicals, and yes, it does have an impact on what they're expecting out of the formation.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see all these slides of the technology of fracking, and I'm impressed with some of the slides that show the comings and goings of trucks and the amount of energy used to produce energy, and I could go on in making that list. And I'd just like to know, has there been any attempt to measure the carbon footprint of the production of this energy, it seems to me that the amount of trucks required for each of these, at least pads or wells, plus all that goes into the production of the fluids, this, that, and the other, I mean, we could make this list up, you know, is just enormous. Has there been an attempt to measure that at all?
There are several fairly comprehensive life cycle analyses that have been done largely within the last 2 years. I should also, there's probably 10 significant studies over the last 18 months. They don't all agree. And so, in fact, there is a process underway right now. It's actually one of them's underway at National Renewable Energy Lab through their Joint Institute for Strategic Analysis that is trying to go through, factor out the different assumptions in those, and try to come up with a more I guess, a range of analyses on the energy return on investment. So it's both on looking at greenhouse gas production and looking at water intensity for the processes. I don't know. Well, I don't know if the GISEA study has been released yet. I think it has not.
No, it's going to be released in September.
Okay. And so that will be produced through the Joint Institute for Strategic Analysis at the National Renewable Energy Lab.
Okay, let's move on to the next presentation in the list.
Thank you, Dr. Sale. We appreciate you stepping in as well for Ken Carlson. And our apologies again, but it was a health issue that happened just over the weekend and unavoidable. So, a man you've already heard a little bit from in the question and answer process is Dr. Brian Wilson. He is a professor of mechanical engineering and is founder of Colorado State's Engines and Energy Conversion Laboratory. He's regarded as a world leader in the study of internal combustion engines, natural gas technology, algae biofuels, intelligent electric grids, advanced building technology, technology for the developing world, and clean cook stoves. In 2009, Dr. Wilson was recognized by Scientific American, joining Bill Gates and Michael Bloomberg in its inaugural list of the Scientific American 10. 10 individuals who have made significant contributions to guiding science to serve humanity on a global basis. For over 20 years, the EECL, the laboratory that Dr. Wilson directs at CSU, has been engaged in the development of technologies to reduce the environmental impact of oil and gas production, and has developed a suite of emissions reduction technologies that are now widespread use in the natural gas pipeline system. Dr. Wilson.
Thank you. We're going to shift gears a bit now and talk about issues related to air quality. Great. And where's the handheld mic? Okay. Okay. Great. Most of it I'll go from the podium. So I'd like to talk today about air quality issues. Many of these will be related to natural gas production, and as we pointed out, a lot of the hydraulic fracturing taking place in California is really related to oil production, but they're actually very related. So this is my laboratory at Colorado State University. One thing we've done at the university is tried to bring together faculty members from across the university that work in a wide variety of different disciplines to try to develop a comprehensive approach to issues related to oil and gas production. So ranging from people like Sally Sutton in geosciences, Tom and myself in engineering, Bill Ritter in policy, others in economics and environment, land use, trying to develop a comprehensive approach to issues related to oil and gas production. One of the things that we've done as part of that is, and it's really represented here, is tried to take an approach to educating the public on issues related to oil and gas production, what the opportunities are, what the areas are that we should be concerned about. One of the things we've done is, as part of that, is we launched a university-wide class we effectively called Natural Gas 101. That's really an introduction to all the issues relating to, from geosciences to engineering issues, production issues, economics, policy issues. So in my talk today, I'm really going to talk a little bit more about what happens on the surface, look over the natural gas system, talk about issues related to air quality, looking at a couple of different categories of things we might want to discuss on air quality, and then talking about some concluding remarks. So once gas gets out of the well, we actually have a variety of different concerns. So essentially, we have production, and what comes out of the well at this point is a mixture of oil, water, and gas. So there is a processing step that allows us to separate those various streams, and that happens in a couple of different steps. Some of the gas may be put into storage. There is compression of the gas. We have to compress natural gas to push it through the pipelines, and then we have to recompress it every 50 to 100 miles. And to do that, we'll extract some of the gas, burn it in engines and turbines to generate the mechanical power. We'll push it through the pipeline system at essentially at about 500 to 1,500 psi. And then as we come into the city gate, we will odorize the gas, put mercaptan or other chemicals in there so that we can smell the gas, and then it goes through the distribution system. The system is fairly complex. We have somewhere around over 300,000 miles of pipeline and 1,500 or so compressor stations pushing the gas through the system. So just in terms of metrics, on the natural gas system, we're looking at somewhere around 5 million flanges and pipe joints, about 900,000 wells. To accomplish those, we'll have somewhere over 750,000 gas-driven pneumatics, controls, and pumps. Use about 500,000 separators and heater-treater units, have 300,000 miles of transmission pipe, have maybe 250,000 glycol dehydrators, Viper recovery units, oil tanks, and water tanks, over 100,000 engines, the medium-speed engines, maybe in the range of 1,000 horsepower used in the gathering fields, somewhere around 6,000 slow-speed reciprocating engines in the transmission side, 2,500 gas turbines, 1,500 compressor stations, and almost 600 natural gas processing plants. So it's a complex system, and in all those stages, we need to be aware of issues that could arise in regard to air quality. In the gathering fields themselves, there's a number of different processes that we'll go through. But instead of walking through these diagrams, which are on the web, let me just walk you through a few pieces of equipment. The first thing is we can use a simple oil-water separator. Again, we often have oil, water, and gas mixed. The simple oil separator separates out the oil and water. However, oftentimes we're using a bit more complexity in what we'll call a heater-treater, where we have, particularly where we have gas produced. We'll take some of the gas, we'll burn that gas, raising the temperature, getting better separation of the water and the gas. And I mentioned this as we'll come back to some of these same pieces of equipment and talk about if we have air quality issues we would want to be concerned about. We also want to remove water from the gas. If there's water in the gas, it can lead to corrosion. It can form what we call hydrates in valves. So we'll pull that water out with what we call a glycol dehydrator. At this point, we still have the mixture under pressure. And then once we release the pressure so that we can store the gas in tanks at atmospheric pressure, a lot of the gas that has been dissolved in the oil and water will be released, much as opening a soda will produce the effervescence. So when that happens, we'll use a vapor recovery unit to capture the gases that are released when we release the pressure. So those capture the gas and ideally separate that. Some of the gases will also be ideally separate out the components for different value streams, although some of those components will also be flared. Now, this is still not of sufficient quality to put the natural gas into the pipeline system, so it goes to a natural gas plant. And there, several other things happen. The gas coming into the gas plant consists of a number of different things. It's methane, it's ethane, it's propane. It's some of these heavier hydrocarbons that Sally alluded to. It also can have inerts such as nitrogen and carbon dioxide. It can also have corrosives such as H2S. So those are removed in the gas plant, and at the outlet of the gas plant, you have a relatively consistent product. It's typically over 90% methane. It has a fairly defined value of heating value, water content, and it's then available to be put into the transmission system. And it really doesn't undergo any other processing before it gets to chemical processing before it gets to the customers. Now, to push that gas through the system, we have this network of large diameter pipe. Again, that's about 300,000 miles of pipe, typically ranging from 24-inch to 48-inch on the pipeline system. And again, pressures typically around 500 to 1,000 psi. This shows some of the pipe being installed in this case. Essentially, it's typically preformed. It comes in sections. Some of those sections are welded on site. There's trenching, and then covering of the trenches. That's all what we call laying of the pipe. Now, again, you've got to pressurize the gas to put it in the pipelines, and you've got to recompress it every 50 to 100 miles. That's done in compressor stations. And the power for these compressor stations, pictures of some compressor stations. The compressor stations are driven by and it requires about 10,000 megawatts of power to push the gas through the pipeline system, about 10 gigawatts of power. That is, about half of that power comes from gas turbines, about half of it comes from reciprocating engines. Again, about half of that is from gas turbines driving centrifugal compressors. These compressors tend to be lower cost than the reciprocating engines, but also somewhat lower efficiency and don't have the and it's harder when you have high pressure ratios. So when we have higher pressure ratios or variable conditions, we typically use reciprocating engines. These are what we call integral engines. These are large, specialized engines that have very high efficiency, very long life, very efficient compressors. Now, we also have a new category of compressors we'll call separable engines and compressors. These are higher speed engines, and they have slightly different compression technology. Okay, so that's essentially a lot of the sources that are used on the system that can have impacts. Well, it's how the gas system works, and all those can have some impact on air quality. So I'm going to talk about air quality issues really into 4 different categories: NOx and ozone, hazardous air pollutants and volatile organic compounds, greenhouse gases, and particulates. So basically, NOx and ozone come from, NOx comes from combustion sources, primarily from burners and engines. Nothing emits ozone, but ozone is formed in the atmosphere through a process that we'll describe. Various parts of the processes can release what we call hazardous air pollutants and volatile organic compounds. These include the well completions. We can have gas that is released during depressurization of the fluids coming out of the wells. Should point out that California does have requirements on capture during this completion process. We can have compounds that are emitted from separators and heater treaters and from tanks. Greenhouse gases are really a function of carbon dioxide and from combustion and methane that occurs during leakage. We also have issues of particulates that are related to road dust and diesel engines. So NOx and ozone. Ozone is the prime component of smog. Ozone is O3, and nothing, it's not emitted directly from any sources, but ozone is formed from a relatively complex process that involves NOx, oxides of nitrogen, with reactive hydrocarbons. And I should point out that methane is not a reactive hydrocarbon. There are issues, there are reasons we don't want to emit methane, largely related to climate as a greenhouse gas, but methane does not contribute to ozone formation. Finally, sunlight and time. So NOx, reactive hydrocarbons, are cooked by sunlight and form ozone during the hot, sunny parts of the day. So NOx in itself is a class of compounds made from nitrogen and oxygen. Primarily, we're looking at 2 compounds, NO and NO2, and these are produced by high-temperature reactions that involve high temperature, the availability of oxygen, the availability of nitrogen, and time. So in terms of oil and gas production, the things we need to be concerned about are engines, turbines, flares, and burners and heaters. So sources from oil and gas production are engines and turbines, and this ranges from the small engines that can be under 100 horsepower that are used in the gathering fields. Those are essentially typically go into slightly larger engines around the 1,000 horsepower size range, and then ultimately we'll have larger engines on the transmission side that can be several thousand horsepower. Turbines are a source of NOx, flares are a source of NOx, and heaters that are in a variety of different activities emit NOx. A lot of our work in my laboratory over the last 20 years has focused on reducing NOx emissions from the engines that are used in oil and gas production, ranging from the gathering fields to the transmission engines. We've developed a suite of technologies that are used across the entire pipeline system, and I'll just say that in the aggregate, those the savings from that suite of technologies that have been now widely applied is equivalent to removing about 150 million modern automobiles from the highway. And I point this out to say that, as has been pointed out today, technology is rapidly developing. New technologies are being developed focused on reducing environmental impacts of the oil and gas production. So now the things that we might want to think of in terms of NOx mitigation strategy would be looking at making sure when we do need to use flaring, looking at low NOx flaring. And we already have controls on engines and combustion sources. But there's also new technologies that are being explored. There's a lot of smaller sources in the gathering fields, and there's a lot of interest in using microgrids or looking at other ways for powering some of those smaller sources. We're going to talk next about HAPs and VOCs. HAPs are what we call hazardous air pollutants, and these are compounds that come from a list of about 189 compounds the EPA has compiled that can that are not otherwise regulated and can have an impact on health. These are compounds such as formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, the BTEX compounds, benzene, toluene, xylene, ethylbenzene. We also have volatile organic compounds, and that has various definitions. But generically, VOCs are compounds that have high vapor pressure, organic compounds. But generally, the EPA uses the term only to refer to the compounds that are actually precursors to smog formation. Remember, I said that ozone requires NOx and volatile organic compounds. VOCs can be They can be emitted by engines. Primarily things like formaldehyde and acetaldehyde come from engines and turbines. We have, if we have venting that is not flared, there can be VOCs, higher hydrocarbons in those vent streams. If we do have flaring, we might want to be concerned if the flaring is not complete. And I should say there's a reason that no one really likes flaring, but it does dramatically reduce emissions of methanes and VOCs. Tank batteries can give off VOCs. In general, they have capture requirements on those, but you need to make sure that those are functioning. And again, a lot of heaters and also can be of concerns. So the sources of HAPs and VOCs from gas production, we can have venting during the production process that is reduced by green completion. California has requirements in place for that. When those streams are given off, ideally you're capturing those streams and putting them into revenue service, but if you can't, those may be flared. So those are they're reduced by flaring, but the flaring also has implications for NOx. So different things that occur in the gathering fields, you can have VOCs from the heater treaters, from glycol dehydrators, vapor recovery units, and tank batteries. At the gas plants, you need to be concerned about venting, incomplete flaring, and fugitive leaks. And again, I'm mentioning the potential sources. Regulations are in place for many of these. From the transmission side, the primary source of VOCs is from the compressor stations themselves, and typically higher, longer chain compounds that are actually formed in the combustion process, things like formaldehyde that are formed in the combustion from lean burn natural gas engines. So strategies here. Again, primarily green completions, as we've mentioned, are already required, and then best practices management for practices in the gathering fields to reduce leakage. There are technology needs. Advanced technologies to help identify leaks is certainly one of the things that's being actively pursued by a number of different parties. Greenhouse gases. If gas is done right, natural gas can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by as much as 50%, primarily by reductions of CO2. If done wrong, there can be significant near-term impacts in terms of greenhouse gases, primarily from methane, and we'll discuss the issue of methane. In terms of the issue of reduction of CO2, there's really two things that are at play here. The first is that when we burn a pound of coal, or when we release 1 million BTUs from coal, we produce 205 pounds of CO2. That same amount of energy released with CO2 releases about 115 pounds of CO2. So there's a significant reduction in CO2. But what's even more important is the way that we use that. Coal is typically burned in external combustion devices, essentially steam power plants. With natural gas, we can use the gas in gas turbines and as part of highly efficient combined cycle gas turbines. We've got a gas turbine combined with the steam turbine, so that we get a significant cycle efficiency. And with that in place, we can actually have a greenhouse gas reduction of maybe in the order of 60%. I should say that we also have other opportunities from such things as CHP, which is combined heat and power. I think I'll skip over this next slide. This is really just what I said, that we can have a simple conversion, but ideally, if we're with natural gas, this allows us to do things like combined cycle gas turbines. The next issue we have, though, we need to be concerned about is methane. As we've said, we have significant ability to reduce CO2, but methane is lost in the process of producing oil and gas. And those that can range, the studies range from about 1% to 8% leakage, depending on the study. We commonly say that methane has a greenhouse gas impact factor of about 20. But that is on a 100-year cycle. We're actually looking at the 10-year cycle or the 20-year cycle. It's actually much higher. The instantaneous absorption of methane is 70 to 75 times that of CO2, although it degrades in 8 to 12 years, and it degrades to CO2. So this presents a fairly confused issue. We don't really understand how much methane is being lost from the system. There's a considerable amount of work. The Environmental Defense Fund is very active right now trying to figure out how much methane is actually being lost in the system. Having said that, we should be concerned about reducing methane. There's no case under which we want high methane leakage. Factors contributing to that are green completions. Anything we can do to capture that first pulse of methane that comes out with the fluids is beneficial. We also need best practices management for what we do in the gathering fields. We need applied advanced technology for leak detection. I will say that there are often issues. There are often times we can reduce methane leakage, but it may require flaring. Flaring can produce NOx. So occasionally we run into cases where we have conflict between the desire to reduce NOx and therefore reduce ozone and the desire to reduce methane and reduce greenhouse gas warming. But certainly anything we can do to reduce leakage in the system, particularly the distribution system, is important. Particulates are also are also a fairly significant issue. These come from a variety of sources. Primarily, it's really three sources: diesel engines, dust, and aerosol. Diesel engines come from essentially the equipment that's on the well site equipment, so drilling engines, the large engines using for cementing, hydraulic fracturing, and generators that are on site. There's also a lot of stuff that goes to well sites that's driven by trucks, and those run on diesel fuel. So you're hauling the equipment out there, you're hauling the pipe out there, you're hauling the sand, the water, you're hauling the produced water back. So that's a lot of truck trips. It could be in the order of 1,500 truck trips per well for large horizontal wells, which aren't really what's in play here. Dust, we typically have dust that occurs from the pad site grading. We have truck traffic on dirt roads, and we have process compounds such as sand and mud. And aerosols are things that can actually form in the atmosphere from complex reactions from volatile organic compounds, NOx, SOx compounds. So things we can do to look at this, if we can go to multi-well pads, that dramatically reduces the dust from well pads. And that's been done. That's one thing that happens with horizontal drilling, the ability to angle and do horizontal drilling. We've got pads in Colorado that have over 50 wells on a pad, which dramatically cuts down on the dust. Also, having that large wells on the pad like that means that we no longer truck tanks and separators that essentially separate out the water and then route the gas streams to other purposes. Now you have a couple of things you can do with that. In the ideal world, you're capturing that's mostly methane. You're capturing that and putting it in the pipeline. The truth is, when it first starts coming out, it's pretty messy. You've got a lot of CO2. You've got a lot of inerts. In some cases you're sort of trying your best to flare it, but you've got to actually have enough in there to support those flares. So I'll just say you've got different stages of that process, and typically in some stages, the very early stages, you may be flaring, and the later stages you're capturing and putting it into revenue streams.
Okay, if we can, I'm going to do the last presentation, and that will get us to about 35 minutes of general question, comment at the end of the presentation. So if we can jump forward. Governor?
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to introduce myself now. It'll take about 5 minutes, and then, no. Just seemed like we needed some humor here this afternoon. We really appreciate you as an audience being here. We thank you for your attention. There's obviously a lot of people in this audience who are very smart about this issue, who have obviously spent some time in their professional life working on this. And so we very much understand that we're here as one group talking about our perspectives on this, but there are shared perspectives in the audience, and even some where you may sort of differ or question, and that's part of what this conversation should be about. So I'm going to talk about the regulation of oil and gas extraction and do it really as it relates to sort of the place that you're in here in California, but talk as well about what's happening federally and happening in other states. It's maybe a point of comparison. I did pull down on the internet the oil and gas regulations for California, and it overloaded my iPad. I actually couldn't go and look at it on my iPad. I had to instead go and look at it on a laptop because it was just too many megabytes of information. That's how much you do already in the way of regulating that. I just say that as a way of premising this by saying, while we often in this country actually talk about hydraulic fracturing as an issue, some of what's happened in this country is that people have come to think that if hydraulic fracturing isn't regulated appropriately, that means there's not appropriate regulations for drilling and extraction generally. And that is simply not the case, and it's particularly not the case here in California. I know you have a process ahead of you that will be about regulating hydraulic fracturing. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at what's already been done in terms of the regulations that you have in place for oil and gas extraction, you have a really excellent foundation, and I think that's a good way to think about what you can and should build upon. The second thing, the point I would make, and it's something that I already said earlier, and it was my experience as the governor of Colorado, that we needed to really get beyond this place of having this conversation about either doing it without regulation or not doing it at all. And we find that this keeps happening in places around the country. The governor of North Carolina today vetoed a bill that would have regulated the natural gas extraction in North Carolina, even though it has a very small bit of natural gas. But she vetoed the bill because the bill sponsors wouldn't allow a moratorium to continue until the time that they had the regulations in place. And again, it's not even an active industry there. But they got to a place where the industry and the community who was trying to ban production altogether couldn't come to what I would consider to be sort of a reasonable place, which is in a place where you're not extracting oil and gas, get your regulations in place, get a common sense scheme in place, and keep the ban in place for a year or so until you've done your work. But it's an example of where and how the conversation could break down. And so while most people who have been in this field come into this with a perspective, it's important to do as much as you can to try and listen to the other perspectives at the table in trying to understand, okay, this is a resource that's likely to be extracted. What is the way that we can do this, as I've said before, in a environmentally sound way? So let's talk first about federal regulation. And there are two things happening really at the federal level. There is nothing happening in the way of legislation federally in the world of energy legislation, particularly in Congress. And so most of what's happening is happening administratively. So the EPA has authority over the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and a variety of other statutes that allows it to, at various levels and in different places, provide some regulation of oil and gas extraction. And it's not replete with regulatory authority to do that. It has some greenhouse gas regulation authority. We talked about that was the EPA that put the Pinedale, Wyoming area into non-attainment because of its general authority over actually ozone in that case. But the EPA is trending toward a greater deal of regulation. So recently the EPA put in place greenhouse gas regulation, gave the industry 3 years to comply, but greenhouse gas regulation with respect to new well construction on both oil and gas wells, and particularly as it relates to well completion, the EPA is now in a place of looking at regulating well completions 3 years hence. One of the things that that happened when the EPA did that is that the producers in Colorado said, well, we don't have to do anything to comply with the EPA because of the rules that were passed there in 2008. And there are other states as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. But just think about the EPA with respect to some authority over the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the Clean Air Act, having some capability at different places and different stages of regulating this, but it's not the level of regulation being brought to bear by states. And that's because the state has a more replete authority to actually put in place regulations as it relates to all parts of it. I should mention as well that the Bureau of Land Management, and we in Colorado, this is of some concern to us, not concern to us, but certainly some intersection with us, they have put in place a whole new set of rules contemplating hydraulic fracturing on federal lands. And it really, the set of rules look a lot like the Colorado rules. They're in the comment period right now. The Secretary, I believe, has extended the comment period from, the deadline was July the 9th. I think they've extended it another 90 days, and so we'll go to October 9th or thereabouts for that to be complete. But I think probably sometime before the end of the year, we could have a set of rules at a record of decision that will say if you are in fact extracting on federal lands and their Bureau of Land Management lands, this is the set of rules you're going to abide by, and they're probably going to look a lot like a set of state rules and in fact a lot like Colorado rules. There's also local rules that are being passed in different places and local moratoria that are being considered, and so you really have sort of this patchwork. What do the rules deal with at the state level? And what I'm going to do is just give you sort of a description of the different things that the states have regulated. Some states, you know, this isn't that all states regulate these things. Some states regulate certain areas and others do not. But there is a trend, I would say, toward greater regulation. It's just the place we're in. What's interesting, in many respects, state regulations are actually following best practices in the industry. So you've got a group of players in the industry who are trying to figure out how to do this and do this well, and the state regulations are actually trying to catch up with those. In other places, that's not the case. The state's looking at this and saying to the industry, well, you have to come along here. There has to be a better job. You have to do a better job in these different veins. So in many places, right, in order to even know if there's oil or gas present, there's a certain amount of testing that has to go on. And so states have passed a series of regulations that look at the testing that can happen and the kinds of shots or blasting that may occur to try and find even the presence of oil or gas. And they pass notice requirements for the regulatory authority, and even some notice requirements for adjoining property owners. Then with respect to well pad construction, and because well pad construction can very much affect erosion and soil erosion, there's a variety of ways that states have passed regulations to prevent erosion. In Colorado, it wasn't just erosion that was a concern for us, but so much of what we saw, especially in the western slope of Colorado, in terms of where we were locating wells, had to do with wildlife management as well. And Colorado was the first state to actually pass a statute and then pass rules after that that really required for comprehensive management of oil and gas extraction along with wildlife management. So they filed, we made a division of wildlife, the director, part of our Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and then the Division of Wildlife in areas where there are different wildlife issues, habitat issues, migration pattern issues. We required companies that are producing in those areas to actually file comprehensive plans. At first, the industry was, I think, had a difficult time considering how they might do that. I think the industry players now would tell you on the western slope of Colorado, where we have hundreds of thousands of acres under wildlife management plans, that this has actually worked pretty well. We have the two biggest, both mule deer and elk herds in the northwest part of the state in all the country. And so filing these wildlife management plans has actually helped the industry think about how to coexist. Certainly well location, there's a variety of important regulations with respect to well locations. There are setback requirements. Some of those involve setbacks from existing water wells, setbacks from public water sources, setbacks from watersheds. There are places in mountainous areas where we do oil and gas extraction across the country that forms a watershed. And while it may not have made its way to an aquifer or may not have made its way to an a water well, it's still important to set the activity back from the watershed. There are other natural resources where we've required there to be setbacks. What's that? Oh, my BlackBerry's over there. Yeah, there it is. Here. Interesting, in Colorado, what we decided to do was to create buffer zones and think of concentric circles. So depending upon where the activity was, there's a different level of regulation. The closer you are to a watershed or a water well or an aquifer, different kinds of regulations kicked in, different kinds of testing, different kinds of monitoring, but to think about it, again, like it were concentric zones, and most of these setbacks all sort of involve distance requirements. This is something that's happening with respect to local governments around the country, where they're really looking at setbacks, and not just as it relates to water, but setbacks from neighborhoods, from residential areas. The question that was asked about the truck traffic in and out, this is something where hydraulic fracturing sort of changed the nature of the business, and particularly if you're transporting water into the area in something other than a closed water line, if you're transporting it in by truck, the increased truck traffic is very much something that may want to, states, local government may want to consider for some level of regulation. There are local governments around the country that have decided to take this on. They require additional bonding. They even require maintenance and improvements be done by the industry, but certainly because of the increased truck traffic, and this is part of the regulatory scheme. We've talked a lot about drilling in the casing of wells. And what I can tell you is for us in Colorado, when we modernized our rules in 2007, 2008, this was a very big part of the conversation. And with respect to this concern about hydraulic fracturing, I think this is one of the more important parts in trying to protect aquifers, is that you do this well and you do this right. Now, we've talked about California already having significant casing requirements in place, and while there may be questions about the kind of pressure that they can withstand, those are things that our commission spent a year trying to do and then revised pretty significantly. And so there are depth requirements. There was a question somebody asked about how long cement is good for mining. We actually have to do cement testing and actually have to demonstrate that the lifespan of the cement is beyond the lifespan of the well as a part of it. And then we have to continue to monitor it, continue to monitor the pressures in it, And so for us, I think it was important to redo those casing requirements, to modernize those in a significant way, but then to make continuous monitoring a part of it, and even to do what we can to have enough inspectors in the field that we're actually able to say that there's wellbore integrity throughout the process of extraction. Blowout prevention has been a big part of the regulatory efforts of recent times. I think certainly since the Macondo spill, there's been even more attention paid for onshore oil and gas wells as it relates to blowout prevention, but it goes along with sort of the drilling and casing. So blowout's a part of it. Certainly leakage is a part of it. What you want to do is protect your aquifers. I think if you look at the biggest concerns that people have about hydraulic fracturing, they're really twofold. Well, they're threefold. So the first one is any kind of leakage back into an aquifer or any kind of a clean water drinking source. And that's really an engineering problem that can be prevented with appropriate regulation and then appropriate installation, appropriate enforcement of the regulations that relates to the engineering of casings. So leakage into the aquifer is one. And then I think this issue around methane leakage is this other issue. And that's, I think, something that is also an engineering issue, and that the oil and gas industry would tell you that they want to get right, and that they're, I think, working hard on pretty hard. There's a variety of environmental groups. Brian mentioned the Environmental Defense Fund. There's been a lot of resources at the present time to try and understand what the methane leakage rate is and what the engineering solutions are to that. There's leakage at the well, but there's also the possibility of leakage in pipelines, in valves, in tanks, and in different work that we've seen at CSU and different people that we've had in talk about this. This is just another engineering problem, but the fix is to repair pipelines, to repair valves. I did see this morning in the Sacramento paper discussion about a major utility and their concern about the number of gas line miles that actually may be vulnerable. And so for us in this country, this is an infrastructure question, our willingness to commit money to building out the right kind of infrastructure to prevent leakage. With respect to air emissions, green well completions or clean well completions are certainly a part of that. Looking at the equipment that can be utilized, and this is Brian's area of expertise, but I think there's a growing number of companies within the industry who are looking at their emissions on site and really how they're generating power on site to either drill or to conduct the hydraulic fracturing, and asking if they can lower those emissions. So we believe that the industry, in looking at these life cycle analyses, understand that there are things that they can do to actually lower their emissions, and they're making efforts to do that. Again, this is an area where the EPA is, I think, focused on what it may be able to do. Remember, the EPA has jurisdiction over major sources, and while individual drilling operations may not qualify as major sources, if you aggregate all individual drilling operations, the EPA may get to the place where they can consider it a major source. But certainly in states and in regions, air quality has been a focus of the regulatory process. So we have the Colorado Air Quality Council that operates in conjunction with our Oil and Gas Conservation Commission when permitting a well, to look at what the potential greenhouse gas emissions, what the effects are of ozone contamination or other kinds of VOCs or particulate matter. And so really it is part of the question for the state of Colorado. It's part of the permitting process. Here it's regional boards under the California Air Quality Resource Board, I think, or the Air Resource Board, and it should be. It should be a part of this conversation because it's what I think concerns individuals who are in proximity to it, but individuals who are looking at sort of what we call the life cycle analysis. Certainly, the amount of water being used with regard to hydraulic fracturing is something that's very specific to fracturing. Much of what I said before is really can be an issue or can be an issue that you solve as it relates to all drilling operations. But water usage increases with hydraulic fracturing. I think the average fracturing for an oil well here in California is something like 300 to 400,000 gallons, we're told. The average frac in Colorado for a gas well is 3 million gallons. There are states where they've begun to look at production in states with kind of a nascent industry. In some of those states, they've seen wells where they've used 5 to 6 million gallons. You say millions of gallons and people pay attention. In Colorado, even at the level of production we have, and we have, I think we permitted 9,000 new wells in the last year. Compare that to about 10 years ago where it was 1,000 new wells. So a significant increase in production, but even with that, it's still less than 1%, way less than 1% of all the water that's consumed in Colorado. Agriculture is actually about 80% of the water. So it's a 1 to 80 ratio at best. It's a 1 to 80 ratio. So it sounds like a lot of water when you talk about it in millions of gallons, but it's actually not. It's not like you don't have to pay attention to it. Southern Texas last year had a drought. And it had a drought in a place where there was both cattle production and where there was hydraulic fracturing going on. And I think we'd be wise, if not to be overburdened by a concern for the quantity of water, at least pay attention to places where there might be trade-offs between food production and agricultural production and energy production. And so for our purposes, again, in Colorado, there's a set of water laws. We're a state that's a prior appropriation state that really govern how you can alienate water, and the oil and gas producers have managed to, I think, supply themselves with the volumes of water need for hydraulic fracturing. It's a lot less in California. Certainly water quality is a big part of it. And so in terms of regulatory processes across the country, baseline testing is something that we think is valuable to this conversation about water quality. And again, much of what's been done is people have gone out and looked at methane levels in aquifers and said, well, this is from hydraulic fracturing. The industry comes and said, no, that's actually a natural occurring level of methane already in the water. And what we don't know is what a baseline test would have shown us. And so for places like this where there's some concern about tainting water, the best solution here, the best antidote for this, is actually to have replete data and to do that from the beginning. We were having a conversation yesterday. There's a county in Colorado that has, to date, no real oil and gas extraction, and one of the sort of major service companies that would be involved in the drilling and the fracturing would like to go in and do significant baseline testing for what's occurring in those aquifers at the present time. In case there is some point in day where there is extraction happening, you can go back and say this was the baseline and this is what we have now. And again, it's an important part of this conversation. There's a lot of places where actually the whole process of drilling or hydraulic fracturing has been shut down over this fight about aquifers, when in fact baseline data would have told us a lot, and the right kinds of engineering on drilling systems would have been the right kind of preventative measures. There is a variety of things that you can do with respect to fracking fluids and processed water, but I want to hit this disclosure part for a minute because this has been maybe the biggest movement in the last 2 to 3 years. And I appreciated your question about frac focus because in Colorado, the big producers, even before we got to full disclosure, which was this past November, even before that, they were using frac focus to disclose. And they were only using a trade secret exception about 5% of the time for all the major producers. This covered almost all the wells in Colorado. So we passed a rule that was full disclosure, except if the company believed there was some trade secret. I think we'll take another year or two to see if they utilize that trade secret more often than we expected, and then that may cause us to revisit the rule and change the rule. Interestingly, there is an appellate process, and actually a citizen can directly challenge the use of a trade secret by a company. You have access to the commission, and if the commission denies you, you have access to the district court to go in as a citizen and take an action against the company. So while there is this trade secret exception and something that is really in place around the country in almost all disclosure places, this is a tremendously different place than we were 3 to 4 years ago. This is a point to emphasize because I went through this, probably the first state really, to try and modernize our rules and to look at this complete disclosure, had the industry sort of be able to hold us at arm's length, and over time even industry players. I remember the CEO of Shell saying on national radio that they believed the industry is at a place where they should be disclosing and fully disclosing, except in very rare exceptions. So the use of frac focus is what many states have turned to. They require you to list chemicals, list concentration. There is also really, for public access, internet websites, whether it's a state site or frac focus, has been a big part of what I think has been one of the more dramatic shifts. Certainly the reporting of spills is another important part of this. Now, there's a lot of debate, again in this state, in this country, about hydraulic fracturing. And I think it's pretty fair to say that if there have been contaminations of aquifers from hydraulic fracturing, it's been rare. There are situations where the EPA has looked at aquifers and sort of asked the question whether it was from hydraulic fracturing. It remains maybe an open question in the minds of some. Some would say, no, it wound up not being about hydraulic fracturing, wound up being by drilling, and that it would have happened with drilling apart from hydraulic fracturing. And again, that's important. It's important to protect aquifers. It's important to protect clean water sources. But the fact of the matter is, in sort of reporting about spills, we've had 400 some spills reported, but our requirements for reporting spills, this is since 2000 and the beginning of 2009, our requirements are really extensive. So if you have some kind of a material that's in a wastewater bin and you turn it over and it's 50 gallons, you're going to have to report that as a spill. And most of the spills that we've seen are not about anything that's specific to hydraulic fracturing, but more about drilling operations. And with spill reports then come the requirements for cleaning up. We've talked about the importance of baseline data for groundwater, for air, for soil. Storage waste is a part of that. And there are a variety of regulations around the country for storage waste. California has, again, good, what I would call storage waste rules. We in Colorado had no pit lining requirements when we set about revising our rules in 2007, 2008. So now we have pit lining requirements. If you're closer in the buffer zone to different kinds of water sources, then pit lining itself doesn't do. We require a closed loop system where you actually require tanks and the storage in those tanks of materials that will over time evaporate, become solid waste materials. When it's an open pit and we have pit lining rules, we still have freeboard regulations. So freeboard means if you're in a flood zone, you don't want it flooding over. So we're going to make you build a pit that's this high, and you're only going to be able to fill it to a certain level and leave the rest for water that might at some place flow in. There's a bunch of states that require some level of, if you're in any kind of a floodplain, of building diversions around that should the area ever flood. So just example of greater regulations. And then disposal is a big part of it. So what do you do with the waste? And states have a variety of different ways of looking at that. It depends on the characteristics of the waste. It depends on the characteristics of the land or the area you're in. We talked a little bit about underground injection control wells. A great deal of water that is the flowback water. The processed water is deposited back into these underground wells. And the Safe Water Drinking Act actually gives the federal government some level of regulatory authority over that, but states as well have a permitting authority over wells, and almost every state where that happens have exercised their permitting authority. So all of that is to say this is an area where if you think about the issues, you think about the problems, there are states that at some level have reacted with some kind of a regulatory scheme. I want to kind of finish off by talking about a concept that's not a concept unique to me, but people are talking about this in this context, this hydraulic fracturing and oil and gas development. It's about the social license to operate. And what we think is necessary. You saw, I think, Tom's slide talking about people who said, well, it's really a privilege, right? It's not a right that you have as a company, but it's a privilege that you have. And it's important for us to understand that in communities that are in close proximity to drilling, most of those communities in Colorado are communities that are actually open to oil and gas extraction. They believe that operators should behave a certain way, should have to comply with a certain level of regulation, should ensure that if in fact they've got trucks coming in and out and those trucks are traveling over roads that least amount of dust that they can give off at the same time that they're making their trips is part of that social license to operate. So is capturing methane. So is ensuring the safety of aquifers that pipelines pass through, that the drilling happens in. And so for our purposes, we're really thinking about this in terms of how we ensure that states, at the federal level, that local communities think about this in the context of ensuring that the industry is complied with those things necessary to give it the social license to operate, but that we also understand the importance of this industry to the future of our country for reasons that I talked about in the introduction. So with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks, take some questions that are specific to policy, and I think we have some time for questions to any of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Do we have questions? Any other hands as well? We've got two regulars. I want to make sure. Okay. Go ahead. Don, go ahead and start.
Yes, Governor. You didn't mention the question of well closure. Did you pay particular attention to that for about well closure techniques when it for how long a period they should last, and if in the process of closing there's taken into account how to inspect, or if there is a failure of closure, what to do?
So again, states have a variety of regulations on it, and you're right, I didn't mention it. Actually, you could go on all day, but well closures is one of the places where states are regulating it, and it varies. It really varies depending upon what the states are requiring.
But I asked specifically wondering about Colorado's attention to fracking. I mean, it does change the permeability, and it could suggest a need for different kind of regulation than than other oil and gas well closure.
So we have regulations on well closures, and they did change, but I don't think they distinguish between wells that are fracked and wells that aren't. I think the closure requirements are the same for all. They were extended as a part of the rulemaking, and partly this may be because I think now 85% of the wells in Colorado are fracked, and so there's just an assumption almost that the closure requirements are going to remain in place no matter what they are.
Well, it's admirable that you have worked so hard and achieved a scheme of regulation that you're satisfied with, and I guess your Coloradans are satisfied with to some extent. So right now, Obama is negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and again, that includes an investor rights provision. Are you worried that multinational corporations could eventually challenge some of your environmental and land use regulations as you attempt to develop the resources that you have?
No. No, actually, I'm not about that. I don't think that they can sort of undermine a state's ability to regulate in this field, and I don't think that we would accept an international agreement or a pact that would allow them to come in and set some other kind of a new floor or maybe new ceiling. The fact of the matter is, federal regulations to date have sort of provided what I would call a floor. That most of the things that they've done, we had done in Colorado, and done in a way that maybe even provided added regulatory protections, and I do not see that is going to in some way undermine what states have been able to accomplish.
Of course, you know that California in the end did ban MTBE, the gasoline additive, and we were, the state, but of course not the state, the federal government was challenged by the Canadian corporation Methanex. So I mean, it's not unheard of that environmental and other kinds of regulations are not challenged by a multinational corporation.
And I'm just not concerned that if they are challenged, that actually they're going to be successful in that challenge. It's interesting, and you know, if you look at the International Energy Association, I think it's called the International Energy Agency, they now have a blueprint. They have 21 recommendations for natural gas and oil extraction regs to really, what we've been talking about today, get it right. And if you look at those, at some level in the United States of America, states have actually done almost everything that's a part of that. There's no part of the blueprint that we're not doing somewhere in the United States.
Yes, Governor, I have a question related to trade secret release. I'm also a regulator in California. Okay, in California, in the oil and gas drilling exploration, if it's confidential well, we have like 2 years and 5 years confidential. Is that possible we can do the same thing for the trade secret release?
Well, I think you can. You're California. You get to do what you want. What I would suggest is looking at what's happening throughout the country, where the disclosure requirements have really, I think even the industry has come along in a different way. And if you can get a regulatory scheme put together that says after 5 years or 2 years, the trade secret expires, that's part of it. And in Colorado we had our own issues, right? Because we have a whole set of trade secret regulations apart from oil and gas, and we had to have a structure in the oil and gas regulation that fit within the rest of our trade secret sort of regulatory scheme. But the industry, at least in my experience, is at a place where disclosure is one way to validate what they are doing, what they're saying about what they're doing, and I think their efforts to be in this conversation or dialogue, but to be part of the regulation, to be at the table, their efforts at broadening disclosure have certainly helped in a lot of states with the acceptance of the industry.
All right. Going up a little bit, the Deepwater Horizon blowout had a repercussion upon the federal organization and regulatory impacts. One of the clarifications was who does regulations, who does promotion? Because oftentimes in the oil and gas industry, the regulators are also the promoters. How would you see the situation, especially in Colorado, as to where does the money come from to support the regulators, and who does the promotion?
Well, some of the money for the enforcement is from money that flows from permitting, and so that's the industry, right? But that's the industry paying for it. And I wouldn't say, I would sort of disagree about sort of this promotion effect. I would look at the efforts of our Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and I would suggest you study that. Like I said, we reformed that commission. It was 7 votes, 4 were by statute needed to be industry. But then we added a group of people. We added Public Health and Environment, Department of Natural Resources, Division of Wildlife, someone from local government, an individual who was a royalty owner. We got to 9. Now, I would just suggest you go and you look at the work of that Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and you would be hard put to say that they were trying to promote the industry. What they're trying to do is to promote the extraction and industries in an environmentally sound way, which I've already said. And so, for my purposes, it's important that the scheme that you have in place and the commissioners that you have in place have this balanced view.
Then the next one, you brought up the issue as to frac focus and baseline. And in that particular one, we have situations where the industry says, well, prove that we did it. Well, if frac focus comes out 60 days after the fact or more, how can anyone ever say, well, we have a baseline or we have an indication that you contaminated the groundwater? Shouldn't there be a frac focus for when the permit for drilling or reworking is being submitted, and that a baseline be required?
Yeah, and so that does vary around the states, actually. Some states do it after, and some states do it contemporaneous with the permitting process, and some states don't baseline test at all. And so, part of what we should consider here is how far we've come in the last 4 or 5 years. And that may not be enough. That may not be enough to consider for some people, and it may be. But I think from my perspective as a governor who went into office believing it was really necessary to do a better job of regulating this industry, having a very serious sort of political fight over a 2-year period, and then understanding 3 years later that most of the fights that we had at the time have now actually been resolved in favor of environmental protections and done in a way where the industry is basically in agreement. And I would say the best practices of the industry are in compliance. And so from my perspective, that's an interesting part of this conversation, and sometimes it's lost. I'm not a shill for the industry. I've had my battles as governor with the industry, but I really do believe that if we're going to have a strategy that includes the development of domestic fossil fuel resources, that that we have a lot to be gained by having a rational conversation about that. Maybe one more question. And then we'll
Is it a policy question, VG, or a general question? Okay.
I'm trying to decide which part of the session to go into. No, it's a policy question. Earlier you commented about fracked well in California, 400,000 gallons average, and these other horizontal wells horizontally drilled wells and subsequently fracked 6 million gallons.
That's in Colorado.
I understand that.
Actually, that was in Michigan, the 6 million gallons.
6 million wherever, and that was the high side, and I'm aware of that. My question is, the difference we're looking at here is a potentially straight drilled wellbore versus a horizontally drilled wellbore. We're looking at 100 feet of pay versus 6,000 feet of pay, and you make reference to the percentage versus, say, agriculture in Colorado. Did you run an analysis on that for per foot of wellbore that's in pay or per foot of drilled wellbore? I think we'd see a much more beneficial number to the outcome on what you're looking at. Did you look at it that way?
Brian's going to answer that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. There's a couple of slides in Ken's deck, but you're absolutely right. When you're doing a vertical well, you have a relatively small exposure in the pay zone, and the horizontal much greater. When you actually, and we've had access to quite a large data set of water and water use and energy production data, and have looked at the issue of water use per unit of energy produced. And in the Niobrara, it was there's a continuum, but it's largely lower water use from horizontal, because more of the water was in that pay zone. That will be coming out in a publication that Ken Carlson has published. There is in the slide deck, one of the slides that Tom didn't have the chance to go over, was a calculation of water intensity, the amount of energy produced per unit water. And for example, gas production from it actually showed that fracking well actually has significantly lower water use than coal-fired power plants, because you use a lot of water for washing of the coal, and then you have a lot of water evaporation in the condensers. So there's some additional information on the slide deck that I'll point you to.
Okay, thanks a lot. You have one more? Two more.
The gentleman was in line first, I'm sorry.
So I would like to make some remarks on the discussion today. So we start to consider the fracturing as something inevitable. And from the point of from a point of view of the state or the public, it's very important to have an understanding how to make the footprint of the fracturing less. And there are two ways. One way is to use better technology of fracturing. And another way is more use of geology. And now I can say that the situation of the boom of the fever, the geology, sorry about it, so it's far behind the geology. There's some terminology, shale. Nobody can say exactly what does it mean. What does it mean now? And we look at the hydrofracture as the only way to extract this resource. It's really not true. Not true. So we don't speak about how to use the natural fractures to extract these resources. How to drill with less damage of formation and to use less hydrofracturing and to use natural fractures. And in our way we can do less the footprints of hydrofracturing. To again about the geology, to put the wells in the real place. We have a great amount of low productivity of wells with hydrofracturing. The big companies feel very good because they drill a lot of wells, and in general they have profits. But a lot of wells are placed very poor. And sorry, it's not a question. It's I would like to say that in rules of these problems with hydrofracturing, we have to use some things which will require some more geological things, more geology.
I think I take your meaning here. And from the point of view of the development of the regulatory process that we're going through, I would like to encourage you to bring that to us, if you'd like to bring it again, to some of our workshops. But if there are any questions, further questions of the panel that we've brought here today, we've got, and this is now generally on the entirety of the presentation, don't feel constrained to just rules and regs as the presentation the governor just made, policies, bring on the geology.
Well, sorry to ask another question, but you've mentioned a lot about the regulatory framework, but in how have you developed a framework of fines, let's say, or shutting down operations that aren't following best practices? Or would you talk about that other side? Because I would imagine you've developed policy.
It varies state to state to state. Usually it's per violation. There's some kind of a fine, and number of violations can lead to sort of suspension of your permits to drill. It really varies from place to place, and I think that this is a place where you also want to be fairly nimble so that you can change that if necessary, change your process. I think there's a fair amount of concern that in Colorado the fine amount is actually too low, and in other places it's higher. So you can kind of look around the country and see how different states have tackled that, and then sort of decide on your own.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a geology question. Dr. Sutton, you mentioned about the Monterey Shale in California. I agree with you. It's very important shale in California. Is you find it on land, you find it offshore, all right? And actually, you find it in Japan. I know that. Okay, how do you characterize the Monterey Shale? Are you by the mineral content, or by the because it's producing oil rather than producing gas? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I understand your question, but typically geological formations are defined based on their position in a stack of rocks, especially sedimentary rocks. So the Monterey would be characterized looking at where it contacts the underlying unit and where it contacts the overlying unit. Now, the Monterey is pretty complicated. The Monterey has a lot of vertical variation within it. It also has a fair amount of lateral variation, and there are places where, following it laterally, where you would assume that the sediment was deposited at approximately the same time, it goes laterally from shale into sandstone. In places there are limestones. Some of the shales are very silica-rich, some of them not so silica-rich, and in fact they grade all the way into a very silica-rich sedimentary rock chert. I don't know if does that help, or?
But it's so widespread, even to Japan, all the way to.
I have to say I'm not familiar with it in Japan. I don't know if it's a similar formation or whether it's truly the Monterey. I suspect it's a similar formation that may have formed under similar circumstances.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
I think there was another one over here. Bill?
My question is about cyclic steam flooding, if any of you are familiar with that. Yeah, well, I've been told in Bakersfield, in Kern County, they call it steam fracking. So then my follow-up question to that is, it's repeated cycles of steam to get heavier crude out. We do it in California. Why, if that's a form of enhanced oil recovery, or EOR, to get a hydrocarbon out, enhancing by using this, why isn't hydraulic fracturing a form of enhanced oil recovery to help get the flow of oil going, just like hot water or steam is? Because I'm just polling the answers on this. It's been confusing to me for the last couple of years. Does anyone know?
I'm going to start out by saying that this is not my area of expertise, but I think we're really looking at defining things in terms of completion when they essentially happen once. And when we talk about enhanced oil recovery, it's something that occurs over time. Acidizing a well certainly enhances recovery. Hydraulic fracturing certainly enhances recovery, but they're a single-time operation or something that you might repeat a couple of times. Whereas I've heard the term, but I think it's essentially steam out, product back type of operation. But it's essentially a continuous operation, or it happens over a very long period of time. So it's just really definitional.
The Financial Times about a month or two ago had a series on shale fracking, and in that article, the CEO of a company that did fracking was becoming the new CEO of another energy company, I think internationally. And in the article, he says that the current fracking techniques being used in shale are like using a sledgehammer, and that the techniques are really not well developed at this point. Can you talk about what he was speaking of and maybe answer it?
I mean, again, there is a tremendous amount of development going on, developing new techniques, and a number. For example, we used to pull the string out and put a packer down every time we wanted to do new stage. As Tom showed, now we have systems that allow us to do 20 stages, and without pulling the string out. We have new technology around diagnostics to plot where the fracturing is occurring. There's tremendous work on the chemistry side. Halliburton has said that they will reduce their water intensity of their fracking by 50% over the next just the next 4 years. And there are new techniques being developed in drilling, things like laser drilling, and so it's this is becoming a very important economic driver. So it is pulling new technology into the field.
Just to follow up on that. We've been doing this oil and gas development thing for a long time, and a lot of it wasn't done as well as we would like to in hindsight. But we've been able to live with it, and so you can say, well, are we shattering these rock formations? And actually, an awful lot of hydraulic fracturing jobs have been done, and there's not widespread evidence of horrible harm. So I think we need to monitor. We need to be aware. We need to worry about issues and challenges. But I think we need to look at our track record too, and perhaps find some comfort in that.
And I'll just as an offhand remark, in the late 50s, they did a nuclear fracking job, and that's a practice that I think we'd probably all agree that we're thankful did not continue.
There's a lot of. Did you have part of an answer, Governor?
What's that?
Okay, I didn't want to cut you off.
No.
The question arises all the time: does hydraulic fracturing cause earthquakes? And in fact, there's if you look it up and research it, there's one of the notorious cases. It came from Colorado, 1964, I think, from a deep injection well that caused a pretty significant earthquake. In one of the examples they cite. So is anyone at Colorado State or elsewhere in Colorado, just curious, studying seismicity and fracking?
There's a lot of people actually studying seismicity and fracking. So the case you referenced, we had a place where we were making plutonium triggers. So the deep well injection. And if you look at all the major metropolitan areas in America, Denver actually has the lowest seismic activity of any other major metropolitan area in Denver. And so the reason they were concerned about those deep well injections, for the first time they began to see seismic activity. It wasn't a major event, but it was an event. It was a seismic event, and it was different than anything they'd experienced before. And so they looked and really made a decision that deep well injections at places where there are faults or fault lines, that part of what you have to do in terms of permitting the well is decide sort of to avoid the deep well injections around fault lines, and that's the greatest opportunity. And I'm not
by any means related to hydraulic fracturing. It is typically really in the deep well injection stage that there's more risk of seismic activity. But it's also, as far as I know, so far, been limited to a pretty low level of seismicity. There have not been serious damaging earthquakes triggered. What's going on, presumably, is that the fluid is injected on a fault that is being held in place by friction on the fault walls, and the water actually lubricates the fault.
There's a new National Research Council report on that topic that's worth looking at.
Other questions? I know we have one over here. Dr. Williams.
Going back to a previous question, has anyone ever seen the pressures that are actually exerted and for how long in a fracking of a well? Any well, any depth, any ballpark?
Yes, I had it up on the screen earlier. They were 400 or 500 psi is my recollection. You can look on that slide.
Yeah,
that's enough for rock fracture pressure.
No, it can be up to. I mean, the pressures can be as high as 10 or 15,000 psi.
How many?
10 or 15,000. At the bottom, at the hole.
Here's case in point. A company here in California was fracking. They had 100% cement on their well, and they were testing their surface equipment for over 8,000 psi. And might say, using rock loading, I would usually say 2.5 times to 3 times the hydraulic head.
It is now coming up on 5 o'clock. We need to vacate the room at 5. Last time I asked, there weren't any other questions. I don't see any hands shooting up. I would like to thank everybody for coming, both here in the Byron Scher Auditorium and the Cali PA building in Sacramento, as well as all the participants who were online on the webinar. We will be posting this session to our website, so you can spend 4 hours at some point in time, or maybe in little snippets, reviewing the presentations. We're also going to be getting the presentation material. I understand from some of the commenters that there was some difficulty viewing the slides online. With the actual PowerPoint presentation available, we'll be able to let you download those as well. So again, thank you very much.